Chapter 2006. But Chang'an did not think so. He felt that this plan was not right. But when he thought about how the 5 surnames and 7 hopes wanted to deal with his student, he understood. Moreover, the 5 surnames and 7 hopes were so powerful. This little plan should not be difficult for them, right? He comforted himself in his heart. He looked at Zhang Feng and asked, Fengzi, what do you think of this plan? If you have decided, I will not stop you. After all, the 5 surnames and 7 hopes were unkind to you first. Zhang Feng was still thinking about what his teacher had said. When he heard that his teacher did not stop him, he was overjoyed. Thank you, teacher. Although this plan is a little extreme, it will take a long time to work. It is a gradual method, so teacher does not have to worry about anything. Chang'an nodded. He was originally worried about Fengzi's safety, but when he heard this, he felt much more at ease. Li Shimin saw that Chang'an did not say anything. He quickly said, Fengzi, you said that marriage is not restricted to the 3 clans. What about the other 4 clans? Since they are restricted from marriage, then the situation you mentioned should not happen, right? Zhang Feng nodded. Indeed, the 3 clans that are not restricted are unlucky. As long as they are internally digested, their population will definitely decrease sharply. As for the other 4 clans, as he spoke, he glanced at everyone with a malicious smile. It is the method I just mentioned. Since these 4 clans are restricted from marriage, then the women in the clans can't not marry, right? At this time, the other clans will swarm over like flies smelling rotten meat. At that time, you can send people to instigate them. These 4 clans will definitely marry their women out. Hearing this, Li Shimin only had this thought in his mind. Brilliant, this move was really brilliant. The marriage restriction order restricted the women of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes within the clans. They could not marry between the 1st and 2nd generation, right? This way, the women would gradually grow up and have to marry outside. At this time, the other clans could interfere and gradually divide the strength of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. For a moment, he seemed to see the scene of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes marrying outside. However, he quickly regained his senses because he realized something else. What should he do if he was driven to desperation? Although these fellows would obey the imperial edict on the surface, what if they disobeyed in secret? One had to know that none of these guys were in Chang'an. Even if he wanted to find evidence, he couldn't do anything to them. Moreover, even if they didn't obey, he couldn't do anything to them. He was a bit distressed. Looking at Zhang Feng, he hurriedly asked, Fengzi, there's no problem with the schemes you mentioned, but I'm worried that the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs will do one thing on the surface and another in the dark. Moreover, what if they're driven to desperation? Zhang Feng waved his hand and didn't mind because he already had a countermeasure in mind. He smiled and said, You don't have to worry about that. Since I can come up with the marriage restriction plan, I naturally have a follow-up plan. Just now was just an appetizer. Let's call it the first plan. Now we need to cooperate with the second plan. Plan B? Li Shimin frowned. He didn't know what other plan Fengzi had. Could it be more powerful than this plan? Everyone also looked at Zhang Feng in surprise. They had been listening and didn't know what the second plan was. This obviously aroused their curiosity. Especially Li Yuan, it could be said that he wanted to deal with the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs the most. Just now, when he heard Fengzi mention the marriage restriction order, he knew that it couldn't be implemented in a short time. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Who would have thought that this kid had a follow-up plan? He hurriedly asked, What's the second plan? Zhang Feng gently took a sip of tea, glanced at the crowd and said, Do you still remember the 2 points I just said to deal with the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs? One is population, and the other is family property. Just now, I was talking about population, and now I'm talking about family property. Family property? Li Shimin's eyes narrowed. Obviously he was interested. He knew that the family property of the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs had expanded throughout the Tang dynasty. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were as rich as a country. When the army was raised, those guys sent a lot of gold, silver, and jewelry to show their support for the Li family. But he knew that those gold, silver, and jewelry were less than 1/10 of the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs. Since he ascended the throne, As soon as he heard the news of the refugees' suffering, he unconsciously thought of these jewelry, and the wealth of the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs over the years. If these guys were willing to take out half of the money, the national power of the Tang dynasty would definitely double. Of course, he usually had the idea to deal with the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs, but these guys avoided it every time, and they didn't commit any crime, which led to the relationship between the two sides becoming more and more stiff. Now Fengzi was actually going to deal with the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs family property? Didn't this guy know that the 5 surnames and 7 Wangs were a hard bone to chew? Even he couldn't do anything. What could this guy do? Although this idea was good, it was really unrealistic. However, he didn't want to dampen Fengzi's enthusiasm, so he had to ask, Fengzi, what can you do? Those guys are not easy to deal with. Don't get yourself into trouble. Chapter 2007. He felt that it was necessary to give Fengzi a warning first, otherwise it would not be good if this guy had any dangerous ideas. Unexpectedly, Zhang Feng did not care at all, waving his hand casually. You don't have to worry about this, I'm not going to fight with them openly, they just have a big family business. Then I'll use the family business to play them to death. What do you mean? Li Yuan was interested. You should all know about the inventions I made before, like cotton-padded clothes, braised meat, and those clothes in the textile factory. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone. Seeing that everyone nodded, he continued. Now people with 5 surnames and 7 hopes are looking for me to buy goods. It can be said that I'm their parent. Li Yuan had an idea, as if he thought of something. Fengzi, you mean to stop the goods in their hands? No. Zhang Feng shook his head and put out the cigarette in his hand. Then he said, even if they stop selling the goods in their hands, they can choose not to use them and find other goods to replace them. They can also buy from other vendors. They will never lose money. Li Shimin frowned. Then what do you mean? Keep their goods? That's right. Zhang Feng nodded slightly, revealing a meaningful smile. Not only keep their goods, but also increase their goods, even give as much as they want. Li Shimin was a little confused. Wasn't this a blow to their 5 surnames and 7 hopes? Why keep the goods? Instead, increase the sales of goods? Wasn't this giving money to the other party? At this moment, he even felt that Fengzi had really become a lunatic. However, when he saw the smile on Fengzi's face, he felt that things were not so simple. There seemed to be something wrong, but he could not say what was wrong. In fact, everyone present had this feeling. They basically all knew Zhang Feng very well. Although this kid was usually unruly, he was more serious than anyone when he was serious. Saying this now, there must be some mystery. Therefore, they chose to wait and see. However, Li Yuan could not sit still. He asked, somewhat puzzled. Fengzi, what do you mean by what you said just now? Why do you want to increase the goods of 5 surnames and 7 hopes? Zhang Feng smiled. Listen to me tell you a story first. Everyone was a little confused. They came to listen to you about the things of 5 surnames and 7 hopes, not to listen to a story. What story was this Fengzi telling now? But on second thought, since this Fengzi could say it, it must be an important matter, so they kept quiet and waited and watched. Looking at Zhang Feng, he took a sip of tea and continued. The 2 brothers were both businessmen. They usually had a good relationship. They were usually the seller who bought the goods. One day, this seller wanted to see the relationship between the 2 brothers, so he thought of a way to start increasing the goods by 10%. The 2 brothers were very happy, thinking that they had met a good person. The next day, the seller increased the goods by 30%. The 2 brothers were even more grateful to this seller. On the 3rd day, the seller increased the goods by another 50%. The effect was naturally needless to say. The 2 brothers simply regarded the buyer as a sage, but on the 4th day, this seller only gave the goods to Big Brother, and gave 60%, not to Little Brother. Little Brother instantly felt that something was wrong. Thinking that Big Brother bribed the seller to cut off his livelihood, Big Brother did not know anything, but still doted on Little Brother, so he gave half of his goods to Little Brother. By the 5th day, the seller still gave Big Brother the goods, not Little Brother. Little Brother felt more and more that something was wrong. In the beginning, I still gave some face to Big Brother. Later on, I directly questioned Big Brother. Big Brother naturally did not know anything. At this time, The seller came and said that only one person could buy his goods in the future. Little brother instantly understood something. It was all big brother's doing. The two brothers broke off their relationship. Seller? Two brothers? Li Shimin frowned and relaxed sometimes. He kept feeling that Feng Zi's words were not just on the surface. There seemed to be something else hidden, but he could not think of anything for a while. Seller? He repeated in his heart again. Suddenly he understood something. Wasn't the seller Feng Zi? Then these two brothers were the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. Could it be that Feng Zi was preparing to use this method to deal with the 5 surnames and 7 hopes? He hurriedly said, Feng Zi, what you meant just now was that you are the seller, and the 2 brothers are the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. Everyone present was smart. Upon hearing this, they instantly understood. Feng Zi wanted to use benefits to divide the 5 surnames and 7 hopes, but would the 5 surnames and 7 hopes be so easily fooled? They all looked at Zhang Feng, trying to find an answer from him. However, they saw Zhang Feng smile faintly, looking at Li Shimin. You are the boss, your brain is good. Yes, that is my idea. Now I am providing all kinds of supplies to the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. There are silk, cotton-padded clothes, food and other necessities. If I suddenly increase the supplies to one of them, think about it. What would the other families think? Chapter 2008. Li Shimin narrowed his eyes and thought for a while before saying, if it's just the beginning, it shouldn't have any effect. At most, they'll just come and ask. But if it goes on for a long time, it will inevitably cause that young master's dissatisfaction. That's right. Zhang Feng nodded, took a sip of tea and said, let them be dissatisfied. At the beginning, there may not be any effect, but after a long time, they will definitely come to question me. Speaking of this, he sneered, and I will avoid meeting them and not reveal any information. If they can't get any information from me, they will suspect that person. In this way, won't the conflict between the two sides arise? That's right. The corners of Li Shimin's mouth rose. Obviously, he was very satisfied with this plan. But soon he seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed. There is a conflict, but the people of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes are not stupid. They will not shed all pretense of cordiality because of such a small matter. After all, their businesses are still very big. This is nothing at all. Zhang Feng nodded, and said with a dignified expression, you are right. The 5 surnames and 7 hopes are not fools. They will not be so easily fooled. That's why I just said to give them benefits first. First, give them more goods, give them as much as they want. Once they taste the sweetness, then suddenly reduce one of them. This will cause them to have a conflict. Moreover, not only this, but also use other methods to break up their forces. What methods? Li Shimin asked subconsciously. Rumors. Zhang Feng sneered. The 5 surnames and 7 hopes seem to love each other like a family, but secretly, who can guarantee that they are not scheming against each other? That makes sense. Li Yuan's eyes were half narrowed, and he stroked his sparse beard, because Feng Zi's words just happened to speak to the bottom of his heart. Indeed, the 5 surnames and 7 hopes were usually very harmonious, but secretly, they did not do little shady business. Although it was said that they supported each other and loved each other, every time when it came to dividing huge benefits, they would often see through the facade. However, this was often a quarrel between the younger generation of the clan. Finally, when it came to decision-making, the people in power in the clan would come forward, and in the end, it would end with a smile, thus dividing the benefits. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that he was the one who understood the 5 surnames and 7 hopes the most. But soon he thought of another point. Even if there were huge benefits, the people who would be in conflict were usually some of the younger generation. The older generation's leaders were still very clear-sighted. Generally, they would not be so impulsive. It was hard to say whether Feng Zi's plan would succeed. Thinking about this, he looked deeply at Zhang Feng and said faintly, Feng Zi, you are right. Usually there will be some conflicts between the big clans, but the people in power are not blind. They are not that easy to fool. Do you have 100% confidence in this plan? There's a 100% chance that it won't work out, but Zhang Feng narrowed his eyes, obviously pondering over Li Yuan's words earlier. Indeed, those who are able to wield authority in the clan are all dragons and phoenixes among men. How could they be so easily fooled? Just as he was thinking, he suddenly had an idea and hurriedly said, "Those people in power do have some brains, but they probably didn't think that they would be tricked by themselves, right?" "What do you mean? Do you have people with 5 surnames and 7 looks?" Li Shimon's eyes widened as he hurriedly said. "No, no, no." Zhang Feng waved his hand and shook his head with a smile. "As the saying goes, a 1,000-mile dike can be destroyed by an ant's nest. Don't look at how these hedonistic sons usually have nothing to do, but they are the first line of defense of the 5 surnames and 7 looks, and also the most important line of defense. As long as we take them down first, then it will be much more convenient." "What do you mean? You want to deal with the hedonistic sons of the 5 surnames and 7 looks first?" Li Shimon looked at Zhang Feng, somewhat in disbelief. Because in his opinion, since Fengzi wants to take action from the population and industry, then what's the use of dealing with hedonistic sons? But unexpectedly, Zhang Feng did not care at all, and smiled. "That's right, I just said. We have to take action from the population and industry first. The breakthrough of population is those hedonistic sons, because they are the younger generation of the 5 surnames and 7 looks. The inheritance of the 5 surnames and 7 looks is basically on them. If we can instigate 1 or 2 of them, then for us it is still very effective." Hearing up to here, Li Shimon finally understood. So this kid is planning to instigate 1 or 2 hedonistic sons of the 5 surnames and 7 looks, but how could it be so easy? Those fellows are all arrogant. And instigate them? He looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled expression. "I'm afraid it's not that easy. Moreover, what can hedonistic sons do?" "Then you're wrong." Zhang Feng smiled, looked at Li Shimon and said, "Instigation is not easy, but hedonistic sons are very useful. Think about it, to be able to become hedonistic sons, most of them have a certain status in the clan. Since they have a status, then they have good resources, manpower, and so on. If we can rope them in, we can get the latest information as soon as possible. This way, we won't be flustered before things happen." Li Shimon nodded and smiled bitterly. "That's true, but how are you going to instigate them?" Chapter 2009. He knew that foppish people were called foppish because they were different from ordinary people. Bullying the common people and staying in brothels were common occurrences for them. Fengzi wanted to instigate a rebellion? Wasn't it as difficult as ascending to the heavens? Just like Qing Chimo, Zhang Sun, and Chong Chong, weren't they all famous foppish people in Chang'an? Just by looking at what they did, one would know what a foppish person was. Zhang Feng naturally understood, but he didn't seem to care. He smiled and said, "I know what you're talking about. To foppish people, you either cater to their interests or subdue them. These 2 methods are the best." As he spoke, he glanced at Cheng Yaojin. "Don't you think so, old Chen?" Cheng Yaojin was drinking tea. When he was called, he almost spat it out. This was because he could hear that this kid was implying something. He was talking about foppish people, and now he was talking about Lao Tzu? Wasn't this clearly saying that Tai Nyo was a foppish person? This kid was too much of a jerk. If His Majesty wasn't here, he would definitely spank him. Thinking about it, he didn't dare to make a move. He could only smile and say, "Yes, yes, yes." Zhang Feng smiled, then looked at Li Shimon and said solemnly, "Actually, it's not difficult to deal with foppish people. The 2 methods I just said can be used. As long as you master them well, it'll be fine. But obviously we can't use them now. We'll talk about it when we get to Jiangnan." Hearing this, Li Shimon understood that Fengzi still hadn't given up on Jiangnan. He could only persuade him. "Fengzi, now that you have a plan to deal with the 5 families and 7 hopes, and yours life is not in danger, it's better to delay things in Jiangnan." As he spoke, he gave Yu Qigong a look. The latter immediately understood and said, "That's right. I'll take care of Yu. If he has any problems, come and find me. Right now you should be thinking about how to deal with the 5 surnames and 7 hopes." Zhang Feng lowered his head and didn't say anything. In fact, there was a moment when he really wanted to rush out of the door and go to Jiangnan to find Yu. However, everyone's words were like a warning bell ringing in his ears. Indeed, the 5 surnames and 7 hopes were like a hungry wolf hiding in the dark night. As long as they weren't eliminated, they could jump out at any time and bite you. Seeing Fengzi deep in thought, Yushirnan knew he was wavering. He hurriedly said, Fengzi, they are right. Although I do not agree with you dealing with the 5 families and 7 hopes, now that things have come to this, you cannot immediately go to Jiangnan. Otherwise, it is very likely that you will not return. Furthermore, since you have already decided on a plan, you should begin to implement it. Not bad. Li Shimin nodded and hurriedly urged, Fengzi, since the plan has already been decided, should we begin to implement it? Zhang Feng didn't reply because he was doing a great struggle in his heart. On the one hand, he wanted to go to Jiangnan to find Yuer. On the other hand, he wanted to immediately implement the plan. He was wavering between the two. Find Yuer or deal with the Jiangnan clan. According to Lao Yu, Yuer was not in any danger in Jiangnan. It shouldn't be a problem if he didn't go now. However, the plan had already been decided. If he didn't implement it, it would be a pity. After a while, he seemed to have made a decision. He looked at Yu Qigong and said, Lao Yu, are you sure Yuer is not in danger in Jiangnan? Yu Qigong paused. He glanced at Li Shimin, and then swept his gaze over everyone present. Only then did he reply, Yes, Yuer is indeed not in danger. Fengzi, if you are worried, how about I send some more people over? Li Shimin looked at Zhang Feng and was a little worried. He wasn't worried about Yuer. He was worried that Fengzi would be impulsive and fall into the trap of the Jiangnan clan. Zhang Feng looked deeply at Li Shimin before replying, Okay, send more people. He now understood that the Jiangnan clans were luring him out. If he really went out now, he would fall into their trap. At that time, he wouldn't even know how he died, let alone find Yuer. It was better to implement the plan first. Li Shimin also saw through Zhang Feng's thoughts. He smiled and said, It's good that you can think like this. Implement the plan first and weaken the power of the clans. It won't be too late for you to go then. No. Zhang Feng immediately interrupted him. With a serious expression he said, At the latest, I will leave after the new year. Now that Jiangnan was in danger, it was already the limit for him to agree to stay for a while. It was impossible for him to wait until later. Li Shimin saw that Zhang Feng was so determined and knew that he couldn't force him. After all, it had already happened once before. He couldn't say anything more. He could only compromise and say, Okay, whatever you say. Can we implement the plan now? Zhang Feng nodded and said with a gloomy expression, Yes, it should be implemented. Lao Li, go find Lord Zhongsun and tell him about the marriage restriction order. What about the restriction of supplies you mentioned? Li Shimin asked without thinking. Naturally, this will be implemented together. Zhang Feng's eyes turned. After a while he said, I will do this. You don't have to worry about it. Chapter 2010. Li Shimin nodded and did not ask any more questions. He believed in Fengzi. As long as Fengzi was involved, there was nothing that could not be done. He was not worried about Fengzi's safety. Instead, he was thinking about the marriage restriction order. At that time, he Zhangsun Wuji Wei Zheng and the others had discussed for a long time without coming to a conclusion. He did not expect Fengzi to point it out in a few words. He was a little embarrassed. However, he still admired Fengzi's strategy. Although it was a little vicious, it still solved the immediate problem. He looked at Zhang Feng and said seriously, Since there is nothing else, I will go back and prepare to see Lord Zhongsun. As he spoke, he had already stood up. Zhang Feng saw this and quickly stood up as well. Okay, you can go back first. He knew that the matter of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes was of the utmost importance. Naturally, he would not keep Lao Li and the others. After sending Li Shimin and the others off, Yushirnan also stood up. Fengzi, I don't want to say much about this matter. Anyway, remember that no matter what happens, your teachers will support you. Also, don't forget about the Academy's end-of-year meeting. You should prepare the teaching materials. Zhang Feng nodded and cupped his hands with a serious expression. Teachers, rest assured. This student will not forget. Yushirnan nodded slightly and waved his sleeves. Chu Suiliang and the others did not say anything. They all looked at him and left. The old scholar patted Zhang Feng's shoulder and said with a smile, Kid, don't worry. Just do it. Zhang Feng nodded and bowed to the old scholar. He knew how much the old scholar valued him, and would not let him down. He smiled and said, "Thank you, teacher." The old scholar smiled and turned to leave. Zhang Feng looked at the backs of his teachers and couldn't help but feel a little sad. In fact, part of the reason he was going to Jiangnan this time was to get rid of his teachers. It was like a child growing up, and always having someone to take care of him. His teachers were good to him, but always taking care of him like this made him feel a little repulsed in his heart. However, he did not expect that his teachers would also support him in dealing with the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. This was a good thing, and also made him feel much more relieved. He returned to his seat and took out a cigarette. He slowly lit it up and took a deep puff, feeling the stimulation of the cigarette. Since he was already prepared, there was no turning back. As he thought about it, he shouted at the door, "Old Du, come in." As soon as he finished speaking, Du Ziting trotted in. However, Zhang Yuyao and Jingshu were behind her. Both of them had tear stains in the corner of their eyes, as if they had just cried. Before Zhang Feng could speak, Zhang Yuyao rushed over and said with a crying voice, "Young master, I heard that you are going to Jiangnan?" She and Jingshu had just heard from Du Ziting that there were people from Jiangnan, so they went to ask. As a result, they heard that they were Jia Doran's men, and that Yu was in danger. Immediately, the 2 girls were shocked because they knew that if something happened to Yu, Prince Zhang would definitely go to Jiangnan. Of course, they did not want to stop Prince Zhang from going to Jiangnan, but they were worried that Prince Zhang would be in danger or leave them behind. Therefore, the 2 girls eavesdropped outside the door for a while. They did not come in until Zhang Feng called Du Ziting. Zhang Feng naturally knew nothing about this. Seeing Zhang Yuyao like this, he thought that she had been bullied by someone. He comforted her and said, "What's wrong? Did someone bully you?" "No one bullied me." Zhang Yuyao slowly raised her head and said with a sad face. "Then why are you crying?" Zhang Feng was a little confused. Since no one bullied her, why would she cry? Zhang Yuyao slowly stood up and looked at Zhang Feng with tears in her eyes. "Prince Zhang, I heard that you are going to Jiangnan?" Hearing this, Zhang Feng instantly understood that it was because of this. He turned his eyes and stared at Du Ziting. It must be this old guy who said it. Otherwise, how could the 2 girls know? Being stared at like this, Du Ziting felt a little guilty. The 2 ladies knew that it was indeed related to him, but they wanted to go. He was also helpless. Looking at Du Ziting's aggrieved eyes, Zhang Feng did not intend to pursue the matter. After all, paper could not wrap fire. The 2 girls would know sooner or later. He had to choose to confess. "Yes, I am going to Jiangnan, but not now. You don't have to be like this." Hearing this, the mood of the 2 girls was a little better. Jingshu stepped forward and said, "Young master, when are you going to leave?" "After the new year." Zhang Feng glanced at the 2 girls and his face was a little bad. "I still have a lot of things to deal with now. I can't leave for a while." Jingshu turned to look at Zhang Yuyao. The 2 girls exchanged a look, then looked at Zhang Feng and said, "Young master, can you take us with you when you go?" Zhang Feng did not immediately answer because he was a little hesitant. He did not want to take the 2 girls. If he said it now, it would definitely make them sad. But if he took them with him, it would be very dangerous in Jiangnan. If he went, it would not be easy to protect the 2 girls. Chapter 2011. However, he had promised the 2 girls before. If he said that he didn't bring them along now, he would feel that he was going back on his word. Jingshu seemed to have seen through Zhang Feng's difficulties and said with a pleading look, "Young master, can you bring us along?" "Yes, young master." Zhang Yuyao also went forward to plead. She didn't care if Prince Zhang was looking for you. She only cared that Prince Zhang didn't abandon her. Zhang Feng was a little helpless. He was worried about the danger if he brought the 2 girls along, but he felt sorry for them if he didn't bring them along. Just as he was hesitating, a guard passed by the door. He instantly had an idea. These guards used to be soldiers. If he brought them along, they might be fine. Even if there was danger, they should be able to stand on their own. If he trained the guards according to the training methods of the special forces in the future, coupled with the resources of the forge, They might become a special force. Thinking of this, he looked at the two girls. I can bring you along, okay? The two girls were overjoyed and almost jumped up. They hurriedly said, Thank you, young master. With that, Jingshu pulled Zhang Yuyao out of the door. We won't disturb young master anymore. We'll leave first. Since Prince Zhang had already agreed, there was no need to stay any longer to avoid angering the young master. Moreover, the young master seemed to have something to say to the butler. Sure enough, after the two girls left, Zhang Feng looked at Du Ziting with a gloomy face. Old Du, did you tell them that I was going to Jiangnan? Du Ziting's face immediately fell. He hurriedly explained. Master, it wasn't me. They saw Huan Yin and guessed it themselves. Enough. Zhang Feng waved his hand and didn't intend to pursue the matter. Instead, he looked at Du Ziting with a serious face. Old Du, how is the situation with the Jiangnan clans and the 5 clans and 7 hopes buying from us these few days? These words seemed to have touched Du Ziting's heart. He raised his head and smiled like a Maitreya Buddha. Master, to tell you the truth, those clans are all buying from us. They want a lot every day. Now the supply is a little short of supply. Not only that, they want us to give them a little more every day. All right. Zhang Feng was overjoyed, but a trace of coldness flashed in his eyes as he sneered. From tomorrow onwards, give them 10% more every day, and 20% more the day after tomorrow, no less. Du Ziting was a little confused. Didn't Master hate the Jiangnan clan, and the people of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes? Furthermore, there was quite a bit of enmity between them. Even if they had business dealings, they were very careful and gave them the least amount. Why would they increase the amount of goods this time? This was a little illogical. Thinking about it, he asked with a puzzled expression, Master, didn't you hate those clans the most in the past? He had also given very little goods, so why did he suddenly want to increase it? At this point, he suddenly realized that he had said too much, so he stopped and looked at the old master. However, when he thought about how the old master wanted to increase the contact between the clan and the clan, he was extremely anxious in his heart. He looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated, which made people very angry. From the words just now, Zhang Feng already knew what the butler meant, but the plan had already been set, so he naturally would not give up. He said with a resolute face, Old Du, I know what you mean. You are just worried that the clan will become bigger. Don't worry about this. If you want a person to die, you must first make them crazy. This time, I will make them crazy first. You just need to do as I say. Du Ziting frowned slightly. Although he could not understand Master's thoughts, he deeply knew that as long as Master was right, and most importantly, Master had a grudge with the clan, he could not let him go. After thinking about it, he nodded and said, Yes, Master. Then I will go and inform them now. With that, he turned around and prepared to leave. Wait. Zhang Feng waved his hand to stop Du Ziting, and said with a serious face, Right now, how many guards are there in the manor? Du Ziting's eyes rolled as if he was thinking about something. After a while he said, There are 55 guards, 20 or so servant girls, 10 or so people in the kitchen, and some old women. Okay, I told you to say the guards, not the number. Zhang Feng unhappily interrupted Du Ziting. He glanced at the empty space outside the door and said, Immediately go and gather all the guards in the manor in the courtyard. I have something to announce. Although Du Ziting did not know what Zhang Feng was planning, he still nodded and left. Zhang Feng took out a cigarette from his waist, lit it, and followed the footsteps out. He stood in the courtyard, feeling the cold wind of the cold day. At this time, there was no more snow, but he still felt as if his face had been scraped by snowflakes, dry and cold and painful. He looked in the direction of Jiangnan, inhaling the cigarette, allowing the cigarette to stimulate his body, and gradually sank into his memories. I hope nothing happens to you in Jiangnan. If something happens to you, I will definitely not let the clan of Jiangnan go. I will definitely come to Jiangnan to find you. Wait for me. After this period of time passes, the clan will definitely become powder under my feet. Chapter 2012. Just as he was thinking, a shout pulled him back to reality. Master! Zhang Feng glanced behind him and saw that many guards had already gathered. He casually threw away the cigarette butt and sorted out his emotions. He suddenly turned around and said with a straight face, "Everyone is here." Seeing their master's expression change, the guards seemed to know that something big had happened. They all became serious, lined up, and said in unison, "Yes, master." Zhang Feng glanced around and nodded slightly. "Don't be nervous. I'm just announcing something. From today onwards, everyone will put down their work and accept my training every day." Training? What training? The guards whispered to each other with a puzzled look. For them, working in the Zhang mansion was undoubtedly to protect their master and earn some money to settle down. They had never thought about training. Although they were retired soldiers, they had not trained for many years and had long been used to this lazy life. Now that their master suddenly said this, they were indeed not used to it. Zhang Feng naturally knew the doubts of the guards. He waved his hand to signal them to be quiet and then said, "Everyone must be puzzled. Since you are all guards, why should I let you train?" As he spoke, he looked in the direction of Jiangnan and his face became gloomy. "Because I will be going to Jiangnan in a few days. I hope that you can go there and help me. Can you understand?" Jiangnan? Master is going to Jiangnan? Why is Master going to Jiangnan? It should be related to the perfume we talked about last time, right? The people standing there were all the trusted subordinates of the Zhang mansion. When Jiangnan was mentioned, they naturally thought of the perfume because they all knew about the dried flowers. Thinking of this, they could understand and kept cheering. "Master, we support you. Master said that the perfume is a treasure. If that's the case, we must go to Jiangnan with Master." Hearing the cheers of the crowd, Zhang Feng nodded slightly, and then his face turned cold. "Good. In that case, let's start training. First, form a circle and run 50 laps around the courtyard." Hearing this, the guards felt guilty. Although they were retired veterans, they hadn't trained for a long time. Suddenly running 50 laps, their bodies might not be able to take it. But when they thought of helping their master in the future, they gritted their teeth and slowly ran in a circle. Zhang Feng stood at the periphery and glanced at the crowd. He said in a cold voice, "Today is just the beginning. From tomorrow onwards, you will need to run 5 laps around Chang'an city every morning, do 200 push-ups at noon, and then practice archery in the courtyard. At night, you will take turns to use the Shao mountain gun." They felt that the whole day had been arranged so clearly that there was no time for rest. Although they didn't understand what push-ups were, when they heard that they had to run 5 laps around Chang'an city every day, they felt their legs go weak. That was Chang'an city, at least 20 kilometers. If they ran 5 laps, it would be 100 kilometers. They didn't need to run. Just hearing it was scary enough. What push-ups were there? He still wanted to practice archery? Practice the Shao mountain gun? Their legs were a little weak. Just when they were about to plead with their master, Zhang Feng's voice sounded again. "Whoever can persist to the end today will be the leader of this team. You don't have to worry about not getting paid for training every day. In the future, as long as you participate in the training, you will get a bonus on top of your original salary every day." As soon as these words came out, the crowd was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Their eyes turned red and even their running speed increased a lot. They weren't greedy for money, but they felt that the sound of money seemed to make their blood boil. Why did they want to be a soldier in the first place? Wasn't it for the title and money? Since they couldn't get the title, they could only get money. Besides, many of them had family members. If they had more money, they could undoubtedly let their family members live a better life. For a moment, they seemed to see their family members eating and drinking well. Zhang Feng was naturally happy to see this scene. He lit another cigarette and slowly smoked. Before he took 2 puffs, he saw Du Ziding come over. He looked at the guards running in the yard with a puzzled face and unconsciously walked to Zhang Feng's side. "Oh, master, it's done. The guards are..." "Old Du, you came at the right time." Zhang Feng took out the cigarette butt and pointed to the guards. "Record it. In the future, these guards will have to run 5 laps around Chang'an city every morning with sandbags tied to their legs and steel on their backs. At noon, they will do 200 push-ups, and then they will practice archery in the yard. At night, they will take turns to go to Shao Mountain and train with guns. Also, Add a bonus on top of their original salary. They must eat the best food, at least meat for every meal. And, as he spoke, he turned to look at Du Ziding, only to see that Du Ziding's eyes were as big as chestnuts and his mouth was so big that an egg could be put in. He scolded him angrily. "Old Du, why are you in a daze?" Chapter 2013. "Oh, Master, Du Ziding looked at Zhang Feng absent-mindedly and stammered. "Master, you just said that you want them to run 5 laps around Chang'an city with sandbags tied to their legs and steel plates on their backs every day? Do 200 push-ups at noon? By the way, what is push-ups? And practice archery? Aren't you afraid that these guys will be crippled?" "They won't." Zhang Feng waved his hand and said seriously, "I have arranged everything. This kind of systematic training will not only not cripple them, but also make their bodies stronger. You don't have to worry about this. You just need to help me supervise them every day." Indeed, he used the training method of special forces in the future. This kind of training was very high intensity, and ordinary people could not accept it at all. But for these people who had been soldiers, it was more acceptable. Even if they were not used to it at first, they would slowly accept it. But Du Ziding did not know. He originally thought that the master's method was a bit too powerful, and the guards could not accept it. Hearing this, he was relieved and said faintly, "Master, what you said is reasonable." Zhang Feng took a deep puff of the cigarette and said faintly, "You ask someone to prepare some meat and some hot water. Let these guys eat after they finish running." Du Ziding took a deep look at the wailing guards. For a moment he was actually envious of these fellows. Not only did the old master treat them well, he even added a bonus to their original wages. This was simply a gift from the heavens. He even wanted to join in. But when he thought of the high-intensity training he had to face every day, his legs couldn't help but tremble. He could only accept the order and leave quietly. "Hurry up for Lao Tzu. Don't dawdle." Zhang Feng glanced at the few guards who were lagging behind and scolded them harshly. He was determined to turn these guys into special forces. Now they had not even run 2 laps and they were already starting to lose their horses? How could he not be angry? The guards who were lagging behind seemed to know that the master was scolding them. They looked at Zhang Feng bitterly and quickly wiped the sweat on their foreheads. They kept their long tongues and continued to catch up with the runners in front of them. The yard echoed with the guards panting. Their foreheads were sweating like beans and kept pouring down until it fell on their clothes, shoes, and even their feet. Soon the ground under their feet was wet. The sweat mixed with the fragrance of the soil, emitting a special smell. Zhang Feng's hawk-like eyes looked around at the crowd and kept shouting, 1-2-1-2-1. In the future, this will be your slogan. Every time you run, you must shout it. Your footsteps must follow the slogan. Start shouting now, 1-2. Everyone was already half dead. How could they still have the strength to shout such a nonsense slogan? They stuck out their tongues, and their eyes were a little blurred, as if they were about to faint. Zhang Feng saw that no one reacted and was immediately furious. He was about to reprimand them, but unexpectedly, someone shouted, 1-2-1-2-1. He looked in the direction of the voice and saw a burly man who was running in front wiping the sweat on his forehead. He kept shouting, as if he was using all his strength to shout. It was rough and loud. This person, Zhang Feng was faintly influenced. He remembered that this person was often guarding the door, but he could not remember his name. He would have to ask later. Thinking about it, he looked deeply at the burly man, and was about to say something to boost their morale. Unexpectedly, a series of chaotic howls sounded. 1-2-1-2-1. The voices were made by all the guards. They were already half dead from exhaustion, and did not have the strength to shout any slogans. But with the first person starting, it was different. It was as if a ball of fire was ignited in their bodies and they had no choice but to explode. Indeed, Zhang Feng's slogan had a basis, and it had a very strong attachment. As long as the first person took the lead, the people behind him would be infected, and all of them would involuntarily roar. This was equivalent to throwing a spark on a prairie. Originally, the flame was not very big, but it would gradually spread to the surroundings, and in an instant, the fire would become bigger. A single spark could start a prairie fire, and this was the most appropriate way to describe these guards. They did not even know how to open their mouths when their strength was about to be exhausted. In any case, since there was the first person, they would follow and shout. Gradually, their voices became more and more orderly and even louder. 12121. Waves of resounding and loud voices spread throughout the Zhang residence. The servant girls with sharp ears seemed to have heard something and screamed. They pulled their companions and gathered around. In a short moment, the courtyard was filled with servant girls watching. Wow, this is that Ning Xiao. His good friend is manly. Look, he is running in front. If you want to say he is manly, you have to look at Kong Shuang. Look at the bulging muscles all over his body. You can see it even through his clothes. Especially that master who is drenched in sweat. Wow, I can't take it anymore. Help me. Chapter 2014. Look, the two guys you just said were manly are about to be overtaken. Who is that? It's Chang'an. He's about to take the first place. Wow, I declare that Chang'an will be my idol from now on. Look at his muscles, tut tut tut. A large group of maids stood by the old pagoda tree and watched the guards. They pointed at them from time to time, and kept commenting on the most manly guard in their hearts. Occasionally, when the guard turned his head, the maids immediately blushed and covered their faces with the handkerchiefs they had prepared, but they were unwilling to leave. It seemed that these maids had been prepared for this. They were a group of fujoshis. Fortunately, the Tang dynasty was open-minded and women had some freedom. In addition, this was the Zhang mansion. Otherwise, a great scholar would have come and scolded them harshly, which was a disgrace to the educated. Not only these maids, but the guards' roars also attracted Zhang Yuyao and Jingshu. However, they were not like the maids. Instead, they went to Zhang Feng and glared at Zhang Feng, as if to say that he only knew how to make trouble all day. Although they were a little angry in their hearts, their eyes were still focused on the guards. From time to time, they used handkerchiefs to cover their shyness. After all, such a scene was very rare, especially in this era. It was as difficult as climbing to the sky to see such a scene. On the other hand, when these guards saw that many maids were watching, they instantly seemed to have taken stimulants. Their faces turned red and their eyes popped out. One by one, they rushed to be the first, for fear that they would be looked down upon by the maids if they fell behind. There were even a few guys who rolled up their sleeves and deliberately showed their muscles as they ran. Immediately, the maids screamed again and again, and their pretty faces were almost bleeding, especially those who were running in front. They were already sweating a lot, and their clothes should have long been soaked. If you want to get wet, then so be it. Why did you have to deliberately tear your clothes and let out wolf howls? It was as if you were deliberately showing off your muscles. However, to be honest, these guys who tore their clothes did have good figures. In any case, they used to be soldiers. Their muscles were glossy under the contrast of their sweat. Seeing this scene, a few more servant girls couldn't help but scream. They deliberately used their handkerchiefs to cover their faces. When the guards weren't paying attention, they secretly took away their handkerchiefs to take a look. It was as if this could give them great satisfaction. Zhang Feng was a little stunned. He did not expect that the appearance of these maids could stimulate the potential of these guys. Just now they were half dead, shouting slogans as if they wanted to kill them. Now, when the maids appeared, each one of them was more powerful than if they had taken stimulants. Even the guy who was at the back of the team ran to the front, faintly overtaking the guy who was running in the first place. This was something he did not expect. However, it seemed that there were some benefits. At least it could stimulate the hormones in these guys' bodies, thus stimulating their interest in training. They would not have to train with a bitter face, otherwise it would be boring. Thinking of this, he looked at the time. It was almost evening. Then he looked around at the crowd and shouted, "Now there are 3 laps left. Whoever runs in the first place will be the leader of this team in the future." As soon as these words came out, some people were happy and some were sad. The happy guards thought that they originally still had a few laps left, and wanted to show off their muscles in front of this group of infatuated maids. Now that the master suddenly said that there were 3 laps left, they could not show off their muscles. They could not help but feel a little depressed. However, after thinking about it, it seemed that it was not bad to be the leader if they ran first. Besides, there were maids here watching, so they could not drop the ball. Those who were sad were the guys who fell behind. Just now they only cared about showing off their muscles in front of the infatuated maids. Now they did not even know where they were falling behind. How could they win the first place? Everyone had different thoughts, but one thing had not changed, and that was to win the first place. Every man had a competitive heart, not to mention that they used to be soldiers. Their competitive hearts were more serious than ordinary people, especially now that there was a large group of infatuated maids beside them. This greatly stimulated the primitive power in their bodies. Their faces were red, the veins on their necks and foreheads were bulging, and their eyes were as big as chestnuts. They kept shouting, as if they were cheering themselves on. Go get the first place. I want to be the leader. I can't let the maids see it clearly. Go. With a burst of shouting, everyone kept moving their legs, wishing that they could cross the finish line in one step. The maids at the side also seemed to be infected. They kept screaming and waving the handkerchiefs in their hands, cheering for the men they believed in. Come on, get the first place. He Quan go. The screams spread throughout the entire Zhang mansion, and also into the ears of the guards. They instantly felt that the strength they had lost was restored. Their eyes were bloodshot, emitting a bloodthirsty light. They stared at the finish line and kept running, as if they did not feel tired at all. Chapter 2015. Zhang Feng smiled. He was very happy to see this scene. It wasn't that he liked to torture these guys, but he felt that he had found the point where these guys would explode, and that was these servant girls. Just a moment ago, these half-dead people were like dead dogs, but when these servant girls appeared, each one of them seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. Each one was braver than the other. Wasn't this the point where these guys would explode? Admittedly, the servant girls were the point where the guards would explode, but they didn't have any malicious thoughts in their hearts. Everything was caused by their pride and competitiveness. The appearance of the servant girls greatly stimulated their competitiveness and pride, which made them display a more courageous side than before. However, although this was a good thing in a sense, these guys wouldn't drop the ball at a crucial time in the future, right? Thinking about it, if there was any danger, these guys wouldn't only save the woman and not the man, right? Hiss, it was a little scary just thinking about it. He had to find a chance to change these guys' bad habits. He couldn't let a woman scream and not stop the car. If that happened, it would be terrible. Just as he was thinking, a series of howls sounded. Zhang Feng's heart jumped. Could it be that something had happened? He suddenly turned around and saw a burly man half kneeling on the ground with both hands covering his face. He seemed to be crying, but also seemed to be laughing. In any case, it was the kind of half-crying, half-laughing appearance. This person, it seemed to be the He Quan that the servant girls had called out. But why was this guy crying? His face darkened and he strode forward. Are you called He Quan? Why the F***ck are you crying? There are no cowards in the Zhang residence. If you lose, you lose. If you cry again, get out of Lao Tzu's house. The man named He Quan slowly raised his head when he heard this. The moment he saw Zhang Feng, he laughed again, but didn't say a word. He only cared about wiping the hot tears on his face. This made Zhang Feng's mind go blank. Why the F***ck are you talking? Are you dead? He Quan hurriedly nodded, still smiling. Old master, didn't you just get first place? What's there to be proud of? He glared at He Quan and then looked at Zhang Feng. Master, this old man suddenly sped up when I wasn't paying attention and overtook me. I was supposed to be in first place. Master, please approve. I want to fight him one-on-one. Hearing this, Zhang Feng finally understood. He Quan had gotten first place, and this burly man had gotten second place. He was unhappy and wanted to settle the score now. It was laughable. They were all members of the Zhang family, and yet they still wanted to fight until their faces were red. If word of this got out, where would Lao Tzu put his face? However, he still had to ask about the dispute of the first place. He turned to look at He Quan and said seriously, He Quan, did you sneak away when this guy wasn't paying attention? No. He Quan's face flushed red, feeling as if he had been wronged. He tried his best to explain. Master, When Song Tai was running just now, he looked at the servant girl and even showed off his muscles. He Quan, you're bullshitting. Song Tai's face was red, and his eyes bulged. He reached out his hand and was about to hit He Quan. Fortunately, the guard beside him had quick reflexes and pulled him back, preventing him from being hit. However, he was still unhappy. He waved his hands and shouted. Lao Tzu didn't look at the servant girl. At the side, Zhang Feng felt that his ears were about to explode. Just as he was about to stop him, he felt his cheeks burning as if he was being stared at. He turned his head slowly and saw Zhang Yuyao and Jingshu looking at him with resentment. It was as if they were saying, "Look at your guard, you only know how to look at the servant girl." Zhang Feng instantly felt that his face had been completely thrown away by these fellows. He touched his blushing cheeks, turned his head and deliberately coughed lightly. He was somewhat unable to stand still because he knew that if he didn't stop them, these fellows would definitely tear down the Zhang residence. Moreover, the way the two girls looked at him was somewhat strange. He hurriedly scolded in a stern voice. All right, all of you stop." The two of them finally stopped after he finished speaking. However, their eyes were still filled with dissatisfaction. They glared at each other as if they wanted to eat each other alive. "Song Tai, did you look at the servant girl or not?" Zhang Feng looked at Song Tai with a serious face and asked. Song Tai's face was red and he stuttered. Seeing this, Zhang Feng finally understood that this guy was peeking at the servant girl. Just now he refused to admit it, but now he couldn't say a word. He even wanted to compete with He Quan for the first place. He snorted. "Song Tai, you lost the competition because you peeked at the servant girl. What else do you have to say now?" Song Tai didn't dare to look at Zhang Feng. He lowered his head and glanced at the servant girls under the old pagoda tree. These servant girls were originally here to watch the fun. When they heard that the master had something to do with them, their hearts were beating fast. When Song Tai looked at them like this, their hearts almost jumped out. They all covered their faces with their handkerchiefs and ran away. Hey, don't look anymore. You scared them away." Chapter 2016. When Zhang Feng saw Song Tai's posture, he knew that this guy was up to no good, so he quickly scolded him. The latter scratched his head and stared at Song Tai angrily before saying, "You made a mistake just now. Otherwise, you would have been the first. But you also worked hard. How about this? I'll give you the second place. From now on, you will be under He Quan." After that, Zhang Feng turned to look at He Quan and said with a serious face, "From now on, you will be their leader. You will take orders from me directly. Song Tai will be the second leader. You two should not have any more disputes." He Quan originally wanted to be the first. Now that he heard that he was the first, there was nothing to say. As for the dispute between him and Song Tai, it was caused by a moment of dissatisfaction. He usually worked in Zhang Mansion, so how could there be any grudges? He quickly nodded and said, "Thank you, master." Although Song Tai was dissatisfied in his heart, he had to accept this established fact. He said with a sad face, "Thank you, master." Zhang Mansion nodded with satisfaction and looked at the two of them. "Don't let me find out what happened today in the future. Since you are in Zhang Mansion, you must love each other. If you can't do this, you can get out of here." After that, he looked around at the crowd and said with a serious face, "From tomorrow onwards, you must get up at 5 o'clock. Then, with sandbags tied to your legs and steel on your backs, you must run 5 laps around Chang'an City. When you come back, do 200 push-ups. Get up at 5 o'clock. My God, isn't it too early?" "Yes, it's not even dawn at that time." Before he could finish his sentence, the guards howled in unison. Although they just knew the terrible news, no one expected that they would have to get up at 5 o'clock. At that time, it was not even dawn. How could they go out for a run? Even Zhang Yuyao, who was standing at the side, was a little puzzled. What if he ran into danger? She hurriedly advised, "Young Master Zhang, isn't it a little too early?" The moment these words were spoken, all the guards looked at Zhang Yuyao in a different light. In the past, it was respect, but now it was gratitude. This mistress was really good. She knew how to worry about the guards. In contrast, Mistress Jingshu stood to the side without saying a word or pleading for mercy. In fact, it was not that Jingshu did not want to plead on behalf of the guards, but she could understand Prince Zhang. This time, Prince Zhang was going to Jiangnan, so he naturally had to bring some subordinates. He was worried about bringing others, so he could only bring the guards. That was why he strengthened the training to ensure that everyone could be trained into an elite soldier. Although she could not understand Prince Zhang's training methods, she would not say anything. After all, if she interjected at this time, wouldn't that be questioning Prince Zhang? She wasn't that stupid. It was good that Zhang Yuyao was worried about the guards, but in Zhang Feng's eyes, she was meddling in other people's business. However, it was not good to say anything in public. He could only explain seriously. As the saying goes, the best plan of the day is in the morning. Although it is still early, it is the best time of day to train. As he spoke, he turned his head to look at the guards, and his face darkened. You fellows are used to lazing around in the Zhang residence. Although you used to be soldiers, how many of you still retain the bravery of a soldier? This time, not only do I want to stimulate your courage, I also want to make you into a sharp blade that kills without spilling blood. I have already made the plan. If you want to be a coward, a softy, or a coward, you can say it now. I will not force you. Those who withdraw from the plan can still work in Zhang Manor. Indeed, in the past, these people had been among the top men in the military camp, and the famous Guanzhong men. But once they came out of the military camp, they became lazy. Even if they were not like normal people, they likely had thrown their previous training to the back of their minds. This time, he wanted to stimulate these people's courage on the battlefield. Clearly, these words seemed to be effective. The guards seemed to have been poked at their sore spot. Their recovered eyes bulged again, and the tendons on their necks bulged again. Because of what Old Master had just said, none of them wanted to be a coward, a softy, or a coward. Normal people from Guangzhou would not be able to bear these words, much less these people who had once been soldiers. At this time, they seemed to feel their blood boiling. Their buried souls were waking up. We are not cowards. We want to train, we want to be the strongest. The guards tacitly raised their right fists. Their eyes were red and they kept shouting. Zhang Feng smiled proudly, because he saw what he wanted to see most. Although these guys just shouted a few times, he knew that this might be the key to open the depths of their souls. These guys were finally going to show their fiercest side. His face darkened. He looked around at the crowd and said sternly, "Very well. Since you want to be the strongest, then train according to my method. I promise that you will be reborn in a week, and become the bravest warriors of the Tang dynasty. Although you are retired soldiers, you are not bad at all. In my heart, you are the strongest." Chapter 2017. The strongest one. The strongest one. The eyes of the guards were red, and the veins on their necks were clearly visible. This was a declaration that belonged to the retired soldiers. Their blood was boiling, and when they thought of the last words of their dead comrades, they felt as if they had endless energy in their bodies. Zhang Feng smiled with satisfaction, and waved his hand to signal everyone to be quiet. Well, I've told you the plan just now. I believe you are hungry, right? Old Du has prepared meat and bathwater for you. Go and take a bath. Thank you, Master. Oh, take a bath. Everyone cheered, and their faces were full of excitement after the vow. They wiped the sweat on their bodies and walked to Du Ziting's residence. But at this time someone shouted, "Master, what is the push-up you just said?" This voice instantly attracted everyone's footsteps. They stopped and looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled face. Yes, just now the master only said to do push-up, but he didn't say what it was. How could they do it? Even the two women looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled face. They thought they were experienced and knowledgeable, but they really didn't understand what push-up was. Especially Jingshu, she had always made friends with high officials and nobles, but she had never heard of push-up. Seeing the puzzled look on everyone's faces, Zhang Feng remembered the push-ups he mentioned before. He hadn't explained it clearly to everyone yet. He deliberately coughed twice and said, "Ahem. You guys watch carefully. I'll show you once." With that, he rolled up his sleeves and half knelt on the ground, ready to start. Unexpectedly, Zhang Yuyao came up. She supported Zhang Feng and persuaded, Young master, what are you doing? The ground is so dirty. Why are you kneeling on the ground? She was very puzzled. Prince Zhang said to do push-up. Why was he half kneeling on the ground? Wasn't he worried about his clothes getting dirty? I'm fine. Don't worry. I'm going to show them. Zhang Feng smiled and waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. He knew that this little girl was worried about him, but he wasn't in any danger. Zhang Yuyao didn't believe it, but since Prince Zhang had said so, she didn't stop him. She turned to look at Jingshu, and the latter gave her a reassuring look. Only then did she stand aside quietly. Now that no one was stopping him, Zhang Feng could finally show off his skills. He lay on the ground and turned his head to glance at the guards. All of you watch carefully. This is a push-up. The guards were puzzled at first, but when they saw their master's posture, they seemed to have understood something. They looked at each other and revealed a smile that all men understood. That's right. Which man wouldn't know how to do that? I practice every night. It's not like it's that hard. Other than those who were not married yet, who didn't know how to do it. Wouldn't it be fine as long as he had hands? However, it didn't seem right for Master to do this in public, right? Moreover, he did it in front of the two matriarchs. It had to be said that Master was really fierce. At this moment, everyone worshipped Zhang Feng. Zhang Yuyao was puzzled. She didn't know what Prince Zhang's posture was, nor did she know why the guards were laughing. She could only turn to Jingshu and ask for help. Jingshu Mimi, what is Prince Zhang's posture? Also, what are the guards laughing about? Sister. Jingshu hurriedly tugged at Zhang Yuyao's sleeve, indicating that she should stop talking. She blushed and angrily glared at Zhang Feng, who was doing push-ups. Then she leaned over to Zhang Yuyao's ear and said, "That's there." Before she finished listening, Zhang Yuyao felt her ears burning. After a while, her whole face turned red. She shyly glared at Zhang Feng and quickly pulled Jingshu away. Zhang Feng, who was doing push-ups, felt that something was wrong. He glanced in the direction of the two women, but found that the two women had left. He asked with a puzzled expression, "Hey, why did you two leave? I was about to show my perfect posture." Zhang Yuyao originally felt that this posture was strange. After hearing Jingshu's explanation, she naturally didn't want to bother with Zhang Feng. However, she felt the gaze behind her. Driven by curiosity, she secretly took a look. Instantly, her face turned red again. Why was Prince Zhang still in that posture? Wasn't it too unsightly? She angrily glared at Zhang Feng, took Jingshu's arm, and walked to the boudoir. As for Jingshu, she didn't have any opinion at all. She just told Sister Yuyao what she knew. Thinking of Sister Yuyao's big reaction, she couldn't blame herself. Watching the two women leave, Zhang Feng was a little confused. He was just doing push-ups. Why were the two women looking at him with disgust? They even glared at him coquettishly? He didn't do anything to let them down, right? For a moment, he doubted life because he knew that the two women had always been very obedient by his side. Why did they suddenly change today? Everything happened too fast, right? Just as he was feeling puzzled, the guy next to him said in a lukewarm tone, "Master, you're quite amazing." And Zhang Feng frowned and was a little confused. Chapter 2018. What did that mean? Why did it feel weird? It was as if there was a hidden meaning in those words. He turned his head and glanced at it, but he didn't know who said it. He could only ask, "Who said that just now? What did it mean?" Everyone shook their heads, indicating that they didn't know. Indeed, with so many people standing there, no one knew who said it. However, Zhang Feng was getting more and more confused. He turned around and stood up abruptly. He looked at everyone with a puzzled expression. Why did Yu Yao and Jingshu leave just now? Also, why are you laughing so strangely? Everyone was silent. They looked at each other and smiled in a way that all men understood. With this smile, Zhang Feng seemed to understand something, but he also didn't seem to understand it. Why were these guys smiling so wretchedly? And it was when he was doing push-ups? He raised his head and recalled the scene of him doing push-ups just now. Suddenly, he seemed to understand something and looked at everyone with a stunned expression. "You guys, no wonder you looked at Lao Tzu so strangely. It turns out that you were thinking about that." Everyone tacitly understood and continued to laugh strangely. This angered Zhang Feng. He glared at everyone fiercely. Everyone 100 push-ups. Hurry up. The guards were a little confused. Wasn't the master fine just now? Why did he change his expression so suddenly? He even wanted them to do push-ups? It wasn't that these push-ups were bad, but they had never done them before. Moreover, this posture didn't seem too elegant, right? They were hesitating whether to do push-ups when Zhang Feng's voice sounded again. Didn't you hear what I said? Hurry up, 100 push-ups per person. This time, everyone didn't dare to hesitate because they realized that the master was really angry. They could only quickly lie on the ground and imitate Zhang Feng's posture just now. Although they weren't used to it at first, after 1 or 2 push-ups, they felt very comfortable, as if all the meridians in their bodies had been opened up. He Quan looked at Zhang Feng excitedly and smiled. Master, your push-ups are amazing. Damn it, you still have the face to smile? Zhang Feng turned his head and glared at He Quan. His eyes were about to spit fire. You bastard, make 200. You're not allowed to eat until you're done. Then, as if he was still angry, he turned his head and glared at Song Tai. And you bastard. Were you just laughing at Lao Tzu? Song Tai was stunned. Just as he was about to explain that he didn't say anything, Na Qing thought of Zhang Feng's thunderous voice and said, make 200 of them too. If you don't finish them, you're not allowed to eat. In an instant, Song Tai felt that his life had fallen into a dark phase. He turned his head and glared at He Quan. If it wasn't for this brat, he might not have been implicated. He Quan felt Song Tai's burning gaze and turned his head to look at him. He could feel Song Tai's anger, but he was also a victim. He also felt wronged. He could only give Song Tai a comforting look. He didn't care whether Song Tai accepted it or not. With a bitter face he did push-ups. Zhang Feng, with his hands behind his back, glanced at everyone angrily. You guys actually dare to make fun of Lao Tzu? It seems that the training given to you is still too little. Tomorrow, you'll run 3 more laps in Chang'an City. Hearing this, everyone's legs trembled. 3 more laps? That would be 8 laps. Wouldn't they be exhausted? Song Tai looked at Zhang Feng with a pleading face. Master, you can't run 8 laps when you wake up at 5 in the morning. Do you want more? Speak if you want, don't stop doing push-ups. Zhang Feng glared at Song Tai and raised his head. He seemed to be thinking about something. After a while he revealed a malicious smile. You're right. I can't run 8 laps when I wake up at 5 in the morning. Hearing this, Song Tai was delighted. He thought to himself that there was hope. Everyone looked at Zhang Feng with a happy face. They wondered if they should reduce the number of laps. Just as they were daydreaming, Zhang Feng's face changed. His thunderous voice sounded again. If I can't run when I wake up at 5 in the morning, then I'll wake up at 5 in the morning. Anyway, I can't miss any of the 8 laps. As he spoke, he turned his head to look at He Quan and Song Tai. He revealed a malicious smile. He Quan, Song Tai, you two supervise. If there's 1 less lap, the 2 of you will run 10 laps each. Hearing this, He Quan and Song Tai's hearts skipped a beat. Although they enjoyed the treatment of being a leader, they didn't expect the punishment to be so severe. However, thinking about it, when they were in the military camp, the treatment was worse than this. Master's punishment was considered good. After thinking about it, the 2 of them could only bite the bullet and reply, Yes, Master. Zhang Feng nodded. He turned around and glanced at everyone. With a serious face he said, Don't think that I'm bullying the weak by making you train. I'm doing this for your own good. At the same time, it's also for my own good. After you retired from the military camp, your muscles and bones have been lazy. This training is to let you pick up the pride of the past. Also, during the time when I go to Jiangnan in the future, I need you. Chapter 2019. These words could not be considered impassioned or even motivating, but in the ears of the guards, they became a declaration. Indeed, they had all been soldiers. After leaving the military camp, their lives were more or less lazy, but this was not what they wanted. The environment was like this, and they had no choice. Now, since the old master was interested, how could they let him down? Which retired soldier did not want to return to their former glory? There was no one who did not want to, including them. Furthermore, in the future, they would go to Chang'an to protect the old master. Thinking of this, waves of energy seemed to burst forth from within their bodies. Thus, at this moment, their hearts seemed to resonate. Their eyes were red as they said in unison, "Yes, old master." Zhang Feng nodded in satisfaction. He had finally managed to ignite the spirit of this group of people. This way, he wouldn't have to chase after them and force them to train in the future. This was because he knew that the self-discipline of soldiers was very strong. As long as there was a good start, the next step would be a continuous cycle that couldn't be stopped. After the rising passion, Zhang Feng waved his hand to indicate for everyone to leave. After running for so long, this group of people had long been hungry. As expected, when they received the old master's order to disperse, these people were like hungry tigers hunting for food, heading straight for the kitchen. If it was not for the meat prepared for these people earlier, the kitchen would probably be in chaos. Zhang Feng actually liked to see this kind of scene because the more lively the guards were, the less dangerous it would be to go to Jiangnan in the future. This was undoubtedly a good thing. As for how much these people could eat, was this not a small matter? Could the Zhang mansion be eaten by these people? The weather in Guangzhou was like a baby face, changing quickly. The sun had just set in the west, and in a short while, it was dark. There was not much activity at night, so Zhang Feng burrowed into his blankets and did not care about anything. In any case, those people were managed by He Quan and Song Tai, so there should not be any problems. Furthermore, if there was a problem, he would find those two people. The originally dry air soon became moist, and a large amount of fog rose up, covering this 1,000-year-old ancient capital with a mysterious veil. Of course, the Zhang residence was no exception. The entire residence seemed to be wrapped in fog. Except for the few bright lanterns, the entire residence seemed incomparably mysterious. The servant on night patrol paced back and forth in the manor with a lantern in his hand. His hands were raised, and from time to time he would exhale a few breaths in an attempt to alleviate the bone-piercing cold. Squeaking sounds came from the ground. These were the leaves of the old locust tree that were blown down by the cold wind. Under the servant's feet, they were like bursts of music, crisp and melodious. Winter was originally a cold season, and the cold brought a lot of inconvenience to people. However, it also had a beautiful and lovely side, because it could temper people's willpower and make them more tenacious and indomitable. At this moment, the lights in the guard's room were already turned on, and the figures were getting ready to get out of bed. Most of them were still active. After all, the self-discipline of soldiers could not be underestimated. However, there were still a few guys who were unwilling to get up, as if they were sealed in a blanket. This made He Quan's head hurt. He was originally the leader of this troop, and could be considered to be in charge of these fellows. Now that it was time for training, these fellows actually did not want to get up. This was simply not giving him any face. What was even more infuriating was that old master had previously instructed these fellows to still laze in bed. This was simply a slap to old master's face. He really could not hold it in any longer. He pointed at those fellows who were lazing in bed and scolded them to their faces. "You bastards, what a waste of old master giving you such good training resources. You actually dare to laze in bed? Do you want to die? Do you believe that Lao Tzu will end you right now? Motherf asterisk hurry up and get up for Lao Tzu." The corner of Song Tai's mouth twitched when he heard this. He had never seen He Quan so angry before. Even when the two of them quarreled yesterday, it was not like this. It seemed that this fellow wanted to show off his might. No, he was still the second in command. He could not let this fellow gain the upper hand. As he thought about this, he glared at those fellows who were lazing in bed and started scolding. "You bastards, hurry up and get up for Lao Tzu, do you hear me?" As he spoke, he rolled up his sleeves and was ready to get started. This gave those fellows who were lazing in bed a huge fright. They originally wanted to laze in bed for a while and get up immediately. After all, they did not dare to disobey old master's orders. Moreover, they were also soldiers, and this was common knowledge. Who would have thought that these two leaders would turn hostile and still want to get started? They could only hurriedly beg for mercy. "Get up immediately, get up immediately. Leaders, please don't be angry." As they spoke, everyone hurriedly got up from their beds. They quickly put on their clothes and stood in a row. It was unknown whether they were preparing to scold them or to admit their mistakes. Seeing this, He-Quan smiled slightly. He secretly felt a burst of joy. He secretly praised himself for his might, but his face was stern. He swept his gaze across everyone and said in a thunderous voice, "You fellows, it seems that you are used to lazing around. It's the first day of training, and you are already lazing in bed. Is it because old master is not here that you are slacking off?" Chapter 2020. Everyone looked at He-Quan with hidden bitterness. They wanted to say something but hesitated. They wanted to explain that it was still early, but on second thought, this explanation didn't seem to be of much use, so they simply didn't say anything. But in He-Quan's eyes, it was different. He thought they were not satisfied, so he said sternly, "Don't King cover it up. Now that old master is not here, I will give the order on behalf of old master. Because Yurong, Wenjindo, and the others were lazing in bed, everyone will be doubled." As the leader personally appointed by old master, he naturally had to take responsibility. This point, he knew from the first day he entered the military camp. When the superior was not around, the subordinates had to take full responsibility. Now old master was the superior, and he was the subordinate. Now that the subordinates made a mistake, naturally everyone would be punished. He was no exception. This was the consciousness of a soldier. Everyone present used to be soldiers, so they naturally knew this. They usually played around and even joked with old master, but at this moment, they all became serious. Because they knew that old master had created these powerful training methods for them. They could not let him down. Moreover, they also knew that in the future, they would go to Chang'an to protect old master. Therefore, at this moment, they seemed to resonate with each other. Without exception, they became serious. No one complained about He-Quan's punishment, because this was their collective honor. If one person made a mistake, everyone would be punished. Even Song Tai, who had always been prejudiced against He-Quan, was shocked at this moment. He realized that he could not recognize this guy. Don't be fooled by his usual sloppiness. At the critical moment, he was like a different person. He had the demeanor of a general. He even felt that he was not as good as this guy. He-Quan did not know that this enemy would praise him. He glanced at everyone seriously and shouted, "Everyone, let's go. Start running around Chang'an City." As soon as these words came out, everyone's body shook. They felt as if their former glory had returned. At this moment, it was as if they were in the military camp. Their eyes bulged and they shouted in unison, "Yes." As soon as they finished speaking, they all ran out of the door. Dong dong dong. The orderly footsteps echoed throughout the Zhang mansion, attracting the attention of the guards who were patrolling at night. They looked at the guards with admiration. In fact, they wanted to join in yesterday, but they knew their physical fitness, so they could only watch and sigh. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away. The guards had already left the mansion. At this time, the sky was just beginning to brighten, and the air was filled with a thick fog. It was impossible to see a person clearly from a mile away. However, the guards did not give up. They shouted and ran towards Chang and Main Street despite the dampness on their bodies. 1-2. 1-2-1. His voice was loud and clear, spreading to the depths of Chang'an Avenue. It was unknown whether the sound was magical or not, but as soon as it spread, many people on the streets of Chang'an turned on their lights. After a while, wooden doors were pulled open, and many people came out of their houses. Some of them were carrying carts, and some were pushing carts. They were the people of Chang'an, and who were doing business. Among them were peddlers like Huzi and Juzi. As soon as they stepped out of the door, they all looked towards the direction of the roar as if they had agreed to do so. However, the fog was too thick and they couldn't see anything. They could only vaguely hear the roar, which confused them. They looked at each other and started to discuss spiritedly. "Where is this sound coming from? Why are you still shouting? Who the hell knows?" But looking at the direction, it seems to be coming from the Zhang mansion. "Don't worry so much. Isn't it good to have this sound?" Everyone woke up early. In another 15 minutes, the fog will disperse. Right now, going to grab a good spot to set up a stall is the most important thing. What's the use of discussing that sound? These words instantly reminded everyone. They nodded and hurriedly picked up the carts on the ground. Some women pulled their women, some children pulled their children, and they walked towards the stall they had their eyes on. The men moved the chairs, and the children helped set up the tents. Sometimes, the large men at the side would come over to help. Businessmen were like this. Today, I helped you, and tomorrow, you might help me. Especially the large men of Guangzhou. They emphasized simplicity. Only by helping each other could they develop in the long run. After a while, sheds were erected one after another. Right now it was winter. The common people basically sold wontons, fermented glutinous rice, steamed buns, and other things with hot soup. These large men were not an exception. Once the sheds were set up, they started to boil the soup. As they did so, they shouted. Although there weren't many passers-by on the road, they were already used to this kind of method. They would make a name for themselves early on, so that the returning customers would know that they had opened a stall. There was another point, and that was if there were people not far away. It was very likely that they were from the Zhang residence. As long as they heard their voices, these people might come over later. The fog slowly dissipated, and the chants not far away grew louder. This caused Wuxia to become alert because he knew that business was about to come. He didn't have a shed, so he could only carry the carts and shout, "Fermented glutinous rice, fermented glutinous rice." Chapter 2021. Wuxia, how dare you steal business from Lao Tzu? It was a big man who spoke. He and Wuxia were from the same village. According to seniority, Wuxia had to call him uncle. They often went out to sell food together, but coincidentally, they both sold fermented glutinous rice. So they made an agreement that one of them would set up the stall, and the other would take the responsibility to sell fermented glutinous rice separately. Wuxia was young, so he was undoubtedly the one who took the responsibility. But this guy actually sold fermented glutinous rice in front of his uncle? Wasn't this a bad business? How could he agree? Wuxia seemed to know the taboo, so he smiled innocently and said, "Second uncle, I'm sorry. I'll go over there to sell." While speaking, he ran to the opposite side, but his eyes were still fixed on the source of the sound, because he heard that there seemed to be a lot of people who made the sound. If second uncle didn't have enough fermented glutinous rice later, he would go and sell it. As he was thinking, a group of people came into his sight. They were a group of big men with bulging muscles and fierce eyes. If it weren't for the fact that this was Chang'an city, he would have run away. This group of guys was too tall and intimidating. However, he was not worried at all, because he saw that these guys' clothes were printed with a big Zhang character. They were indeed people from Zhang Mansion. He was wild with joy and hurried to greet them with the cart. "Gentlemen, please give me a bowl of fermented glutinous rice." He didn't care at all why these guys were running here early in the morning. He was carrying steel plates on his back and sandbags on his feet. What he cared about most at the moment was to make these guys buy his fermented glutinous rice. The surrounding people who sold steamed buns, wontons, and fermented glutinous rice were a little unhappy when they saw the situation. Especially second uncle, who secretly scolded Wuxia for being unfilial and selling fermented glutinous rice. Although they despised Wuxia a million times in their hearts, they also knew that this was their source of income, so they kept shouting at He Quan and the others. "Sir, fermented glutinous rice, the best fermented glutinous rice. Steamed buns, one is worth two. Sir, come and have a look." No matter how loud the crowd's voices were, He Quan didn't seem to be too interested. He just glanced at them. However, the people behind him couldn't stand it anymore. Looking at the white steamed buns and scalding wontons, their saliva was about to drip out. However, without the boss's permission, they didn't dare to go up. They were enforcing military discipline now. If they weren't careful, they might be punished again. Song Tai actually had the same thoughts as everyone else. He also wanted to go up and get some fermented rice wine. After all, they hadn't eaten for a whole night. Besides, they had been running for so long. Everyone's stomachs were already shriveled. If it was a normal day, he would have already gone up and drank it. However, it was the training period now. Old Master had just appointed the training plan. As the second in command of the team, he naturally couldn't take the lead and commit a crime. Besides, he was very impressed with Hequan this morning. When Wuxia saw that these guys were unmoved, he had an idea. He quickly opened the jar, and the aroma of fermented glutinous rice instantly spread out. The whole street could clearly smell it. When the guards smelled the aroma, they didn't feel good. They were already hungry. Now that Wuxia deliberately opened the lid of the fermented glutinous rice wine, they immediately felt their legs go soft. However, without the boss's permission, even if they were hungry, they didn't dare to stop. Thus, everyone looked at Hequan with a pleading face. Hequan suddenly trembled. He seemed to feel the burning gazes behind him. He secretly glanced at them. When he saw the pleading look on everyone's faces, he knew that these guys were really hungry. In fact, he was already hungry. However, as the leader of the team and also shouldered the heavy responsibility of Old Master, he felt that he couldn't be so reckless. At least, he had to respect the majority's wishes. Now that everyone was hungry, there was no harm in drinking a bowl. Thinking about it, he turned his head and glanced at the fermented glutinous rice wine in Wuxia's hand. The white glutinous rice wine came into view. He could clearly smell the fermented rice wine. He instantly felt saliva secreting in his mouth. Swallowing his saliva, he suddenly raised his head. Stop! Everyone was overjoyed and quickly stopped in their tracks. Hequan turned around and glanced at everyone. He said seriously, "Originally, this is training. We shouldn't be eating, but, all right. Great leader you see that all of us are starving. Why don't we eat first?" Songtai couldn't stand it anymore. He looked at Wuxia's fermented glutinous rice wine and complained to Hequan. He was indeed hungry. He didn't think that this guy would let everyone eat. But if he wanted to eat, just eat. Why did he have to make such a long speech? Obviously, Songtai's words attracted everyone's goodwill. They nodded and signaled Hequan to stop talking nonsense. Eating was the most important thing. After being snubbed, Hequan didn't waste any more time. He simply waved his hand. "Let's go eat." Everyone cheered. They didn't care about their impression of him and ran towards the stall. Chapter 2022. The vendors had been waiting for this moment. The wontons in the pot had already been put into the pot, and the fermented glutinous rice was almost heated up. Now that so many people had come, they immediately opened the pot. They set up chairs and stirred the food in the pot happily. "Dear guests, please wait for a moment. It will be ready soon. Come, please sit here. The fermented glutinous rice is here. 2 steamed buns." For a moment, the shouting spread through the streets of Chang'an. A large group of 50 people sat on the street. They drank the fermented glutinous rice and ate the steamed buns. At this moment, they had nothing else to ask for. Just as they were eating heartily, a scream came from not far away. "Hey, isn't this Hequan? Why are you here? And Songtai, why are you 2 old men here? Why is there such a large group?" Hequan and Songtai looked in the direction of the voice and saw a group of 10 people slowly walking towards them. There were many old faces among them. They hurried to greet them. "Zhouji Changxi, why are you 2 here?" The man called Zhouji laughed and patted Hequan on the shoulder. He said, "I'm taking everyone down the mountain to buy something. What about you? Why are you bringing so many people? Are you here to drink fermented glutinous rice?" As he spoke, he glanced at the guards who were drinking fermented glutinous rice with a trace of contempt. In fact, he knew these people. They used to be soldiers together. After they retired, they were assigned to work under Zhang Feng. He was a guard at the academy and thought that he was better than these guys in front of him. Indeed, people in this era had the view that all things were inferior and only education was superior. Guards at the academy were definitely better than guards at other places, not to mention those in the forging workshop and the textile factory. Hequan saw all this. Although he usually played with his brothers, he could not be looked down upon by this guy. He clapped his hands and glanced at Zhouji and the others contemptuously. "You know nothing. This is the training method that the master specially developed for us. He said that it would make us return to the peak of the army. It would be a piece of cake for us to defeat the general. What? Zhou Ji suddenly stood up from his stool and stared at He Quan with his eyes wide open. Are you telling the truth? He was also a soldier. He knew that retired soldiers would slowly become lazy and their strength would not be able to keep up with active soldiers. Therefore, he often thought about how to recover his strength. However, without the systematic training of the military camp, it was impossible. Now this guy, He Quan, actually said that the old master could make people return to their peak. How could they not be excited? He had no doubts at all, because he believed that his master could definitely do it. What a joke! His master could even ascend to the heavens. How could he not be able to do such a small thing? How could this be? He Quan looked at Zhou Ji with a playful expression. He seemed to enjoy this feeling very much. He took off the steel plates on his body and waved the sandbag on his leg. With a proud expression he said, "Open your dog eyes and look. This is Master's secret weapon." What? Zhou Ji stared at the thing in front of him with his eyes wide open. He used to be a soldier and had seen people train while wearing sandbags, but he had never seen anyone train while wearing steel plates. Could it really be the Master's secret weapon? Hiss! He could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. If he could get this secret weapon or join He Quan and the others, he might be able to return to his peak. Thinking about this, he changed his attitude and said with a pleading expression, "He Quan, we are all good brothers. Tell us about your training methods." These words also reminded the people behind him. They were still immersed in the master's training methods. Now that they heard Zhou Ji's words, they instantly understood. That's right, since the master's training methods were so powerful, he should also give them a copy. They all looked at He Quan and begged, "He Quan, no big brother, he ancestor, can you tell us about the master's training methods?" He Quan had a proud smile on his face. He thought to himself, "Who told you to look down on Lao Tzu just now? Why are you kneeling and licking his boots now?" In fact, there was a moment when he wanted to tell them about the training methods. Firstly, he wanted to take down these people's arrogance. Secondly, he wanted them to have a taste of this bitter training method. But on second thought, this was the training method that the master had made for the guards of the Zhang residence. Why should he tell them about it? Moreover, these people were not good people. When he was a soldier, they bullied him a lot. So he could not tell them about it. Thinking about this, he glanced at the guards of the Zhang residence. Then he looked at Zhou Ji and said proudly, "It's not that I don't want to tell you, but this is the master's method. We cannot reveal it. Moreover, the master is going to Jiangnan soon." What? The master is going to Jiangnan? The people behind Zhou Ji all exclaimed. This could be said to be the most important news they had heard. The master was going to Jiangnan? No wonder the master wanted to train these people. This was probably to prepare for his trip to Jiangnan. Chapter 2023. But why didn't their master tell them that he was going to Jiangnan? Couldn't they protect their master? Their competitive hearts were born one by one. At this moment, they had already decided to learn this training method. Even if it wasn't for themselves, they had to do it for their master. What if their master went to Jiangnan without anyone to protect him? He Quan didn't know this and was still bragging. "Master is going to Jiangnan. When he goes, we have to guard." The stall owners next to him were shocked when they heard this and quickly discussed it with the people around them. Just now, the guard of Zhang Mansion said that Prince Zhang is leaving? Yes, I also heard about it. Why do you think Prince Zhang is going to Jiangnan? I heard that it's for some perfume. I wonder when he's leaving? As they spoke, everyone once again looked at He Quan, because they knew that the news that the guards of the Zhang Mansion could send out would definitely not be wrong. Young Master Zhang's departure was definitely a piece of heavy news. Sure enough, He Quan spoke with assurance again. Master said that he will leave by the end of the year at the latest. This time, not only did Zhou Ji and the others exclaim, but the surrounding vendors also couldn't sit still. This was because young Master Zhang had done them a great favor before. It could even be said that he was their second parent. Many of the people present had become rich because of young Master Zhang, and some had become rich because of young Master Zhang's craftsmanship. Now that they heard that young Master Zhang was leaving, the first thing they wanted to do was to see him. Thinking of this, the stall owners hurriedly began to pack up their chairs without waiting for He Quan and the others to finish eating. This caused the group of guards to be dumbfounded. They hurriedly asked, "We haven't finished eating yet. Why are you packing up?" The vendor hurriedly packed up his stall and said without turning his head, "I'm going to see young Master Zhang." The guards were even more confused and asked again, "Why do you want to see our master?" "Prince Zhang is leaving. If you don't see him, you won't be able to make it." The stall owner was a little impatient. As he packed up, he urged the guards, "Hurry up and leave. I won't charge you today." As they spoke, the peddlers packed up their furniture, supported each other, and ran to Zhang Mansion in twos and threes. The guards were dumbfounded. Just now, they said that the master was leaving, but they didn't say that he was leaving now. Did these guys need to be in such a hurry? However, this might be a good thing. At least it showed the importance of the old master in the hearts of the people of Chang'an. Once they heard that he was leaving, they all went to visit him. He Quan didn't care about this. He was still thinking about training. He glanced at everyone and said, "Line up and continue training." After that, he looked at Zhou Ji and sneered, "Do you still want to follow us?" Initially, Zhou Ji wanted to follow He Quan. However, after hearing what He Quan said, he immediately changed his mind. If he followed this guy, he would lose face. It was better to look for master and join the training as soon as possible. Also, he had to inform some of the forging workshops and textile factories to come over. Thinking of this, he casually replied, "No, next time." With that, he turned around and left. He Quan glanced at Zhou Ji's back and turned to look at everyone. "Continue with the training. Let's run." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone started to move forward again. At this moment, a sedan chair swayed over. The curtain of the sedan chair was pulled open and a middle-aged man stuck his head out. It was Zhang Sun Wuji, who was preparing to go to court. He glanced at the group in the distance and said to the servant, "What were those people shouting just now? Also, who are they?" The servant frowned slightly and glanced into the distance. After a long time he said, "Master, they seem to be from Zhang Mansion. As for the number they were shouting, it seemed to be 1212121. Zhang Mansion's people?" Zhang Sun Wuji frowned and stroked his beard. He muttered to himself, "What is this Fengzi up to now?" He thought for a while but still couldn't figure it out. He waved his hand and said, "Let's go to court." The servant nodded and looked deeply at the departing figure. Then he ordered the sedan chair bearers to go to the palace. There were no obstacles along the way. Zhang Sun Wuji soon arrived at the palace. At this moment, quite a number of imperial officials were already waiting outside the main hall. Zhang Sun Wuji went up to exchange some pleasantries with Wei Zhang and the others. A moment later, the door was pulled open. A strong man stood at the door and shouted with a sharp voice, "All officials present for an audience." The officials didn't hesitate and walked to the main hall together. As soon as they stood still, Li Shimin walked out in his dragon robe. He sat on the dragon throne and looked down at the officials. "Officials, I have something to report." A grand scribe bowed and came forward. "Your Majesty, recently the military supplies have run out. Your Majesty, please allocate more supplies. In addition, a lot of military equipment is damaged. Your Majesty, please send people to repair it." Hearing these things that required money, Li Shimin felt a headache. Originally, the Tang dynasty was considered rich, but when money was used on the military, it felt like no amount of money was enough. Food, clothes, daily necessities, and so on, everything was several times more expensive than the expenses of ordinary people. However, he couldn't refuse. He had to bite the bullet and replied, "For the supplies, go to the Ministry of Revenue. For the equipment, go to the Ministry of Works." Chapter 2024. Speaking of this, he suddenly remembered something. He asked the Ministry of Works to repair the burned West Market and East Market in Chang'an City. He wondered how they were doing. Thinking of this, he glanced at the officials. "Where is the Minister of Works?" As soon as he finished speaking, a man in his 50s stood up. He was the Minister of Works, Duanluan. Duan Luan stepped forward and bowed. Your Majesty, I am here. Li Shimin nodded slightly and said seriously, Minister Duan, I suddenly remembered something. How is the West Market and East Market that I asked you to repair? The corner of Duan Luan's mouth twitched. Last time when the West Market and East Market of Chang'an City were burned, His Majesty did order the Ministry of Works to repair them. But how could the Ministry of Works have the money to repair them? So it had been delayed until now. Why did His Majesty suddenly think of this? It was all because of the Grand Scribe. If he had not reported, why would His Majesty suddenly think of this? Thinking of this, he turned around and glared at the Grand Scribe. The poor Grand Scribe was confused. He did not know what had happened. He had only reported some military matters. Why was the Minister of Works glaring at him? Although he was confused, he did not dare to say anything. Because Duan Luan's position was higher than his, he could only put on a smiling face. Duan Luan was even angrier. He thought the Grand Scribe was laughing at him. He was so angry that he could guarantee that if it were not for the court, he would have beaten this guy up. But at this moment, Li Shimin's dignified voice sounded again. Minister Duan, why are you not saying a word? Duan Luan was shocked. He slowly turned his head and looked at Li Shimin with trembling eyes. He did not know what to say. Li Shimin seemed to have noticed something. He frowned and said with dissatisfaction, Minister Duan, have you not repaired them? Hearing this, Duan Luan's legs went weak. He did not care about anything else. He quickly knelt on the ground and shouted, Your Majesty, please forgive me. Seeing this, the other Ministry of Works officials behind him did not dare to hesitate. They quickly knelt on the ground and begged for forgiveness. As expected, Li Shimin sneered. These bastards really did not repair them. No wonder he dallied for so long. He snorted and said, Why wasn't it repaired? Duan Luan didn't reply immediately. Instead, he secretly glanced at Dai Zhou. Dai Ren shuddered, feeling a bad premonition, but he couldn't put his finger on it, so he coughed twice and pretended to be calm. On the other hand, Duan Luan trembled as he raised his head to look at Li Shimin. He said softly, Your Majesty, it's not that the Ministry of Works doesn't want to repair it. It's just that we don't have the money or the workers. No money? No workers? Li Shimin's mouth twitched. He felt that his intelligence had been insulted. He could believe that the Ministry of Works did not have money, but how could they not have workers? Then what was the use of such a large Ministry of Works? He suddenly stood up and glared at Duan Luan. Duan Luan, do you think I'm easy to fool? How could the Ministry of Works not have money? What was even more ridiculous was that there were no workers. Do you know what the crime of deceiving the monarch is? This subject doesn't dare to deceive the monarch. Duan Luan broke out in cold sweat and his legs began to tremble. Your Majesty, the Ministry of Works has been repairing the inside and outside of the palace, as well as the barracks, the residences of the emperors and ministers. Normally, they should receive a lot of money, but there are still many debts that haven't been settled. This is why they can't make ends meet. The Ministry of Works has long run out of money to repair the West and East markets. Li Shimin was startled. He didn't think that there would be such a thing. Indeed, other than repairing the inside and outside of the palace, the Ministry of Works would also repair the barracks for the ministers. This way, they could earn some money and wouldn't empty the national treasury. The wages of the Ministry of Works workers would also increase. But he didn't think that the Ministry of Works still had debts that hadn't been collected. If that was the case, did he blame this fellow wrongly? He deliberately coughed twice to cover up his embarrassment and said, Then why didn't you borrow money from the Minister of Revenue, Dai Zhou? Here it came? Dai Zhou trembled and felt a chill run down his spine. He faintly remembered something. Duan Luan had once come to him to borrow money, but he didn't lend him any. Now that the emperor suddenly asked, this old fellow wouldn't reveal it, right? No wonder this old fellow looked at him strangely just now. So it was here. With that thought, he narrowed his eyes and turned to look at Duan Luan. Duan Luan spoke again, Your Majesty, this subject went to Minister Dai last time, but Minister Dai said that he didn't have any money. Li Shimin frowned slightly and turned to look at Dai Zhou. He asked with a puzzled expression, Beloved official Dai, the Ministry of Revenue doesn't have any money? Daizhou was slightly taken aback and hurriedly stepped forward. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, it's not that this subject doesn't want to lend money to Minister Duan, but the Ministry of Revenue doesn't have much savings. Moreover, Minister Duan didn't explain clearly last time, so this subject thought that he was joking, so, as he spoke, he smiled awkwardly. This subject is also powerless." Hearing this, Li Shimin understood. Duan Luan probably really didn't have any extra money, so he went to borrow money from Daizhou. Daizhou didn't lend him money for various reasons. It could be that he didn't have enough money, or he deliberately didn't lend him money, but none of this was important. Since Daizhou didn't lend him money, he naturally had his own reasons. Chapter 2025. But the burned West Market and East Market still needed to be repaired. Thinking about this, Li Shimin looked at Duan Luan and Daizhou and said seriously, "I don't care if you have money or not, but the West Market and East Market still need to be repaired. You two have to figure it out yourselves." After that, he glanced at the officials. "Is there anything else you want to report? If not, you can leave now." The officials looked at each other and stepped forward as if they had reached some kind of agreement. "Farewell, Your Majesty." Li Shimin nodded and left. The officials got up and prepared to leave the palace one after another, especially Daizhou. He wanted to slip away as soon as he got up because His Majesty just asked him and Duan Luan to repair the West Market and East Market together. This was a joke. He was the Minister of Revenue, not the Ministry of Works. He was not that stupid to ask him to participate in this for money. Thinking about this, he quickened his pace. But at this moment, he heard a voice behind him. "Minister Dai." The voice made Daizhou's heart jump. He knew it was his enemy Duan Luan without looking. Even though he wanted to leave as soon as possible, he had to turn around and smile. "Minister Duan, what's the matter?" Duan Luan's mouth twitched. He cursed this old man in his heart. Just now, His Majesty said that he wanted to repair the West Market and East Market. Now he was asking what was the matter? But on second thought, he could understand this guy. Because the Ministry of Works often repaired things, he didn't have enough money or owed money. So he went to the Ministry of Revenue to borrow money. In the past, Daizhou welcomed him with a good face and would lend him some money. Now that he went frequently, he was lucky not to be scolded. But now it was His Majesty's order. He didn't believe that this guy wouldn't pay. Thinking about this, he sneered and said, "Minister Dai, you can't just leave like this. His Majesty just asked us to repair the West Market and East Market." Hearing that he needed money, Daizhou's face fell. The Ministry of Revenue had allocated a lot of money to support the Battle of Chiotzi. He didn't lend money to this old man last time, and he was still holding a grudge. Daizhou waved his sleeve and said angrily, "No money." "You," Duan Luan pointed at Daizhou. His face flushed red, unable to speak. The last time he went to borrow money from these old fellows, they didn't give him any face. Originally, he thought that since His Majesty had given the order this time, he should be able to borrow money. Who would have thought that this fellow would still be so stingy? He said angrily, "This time, it was His Majesty who ordered you to find a way to repair the eastern and western markets. Are you not going to listen to His Majesty's words?" "Of course, Your Majesty's words must be obeyed." Dairen cupped his hands in the direction of the palace. Then he looked at Duan Luan and snorted coldly. "Do you think that money is dirt? You can have as much as you want. My Ministry of Revenue also needs to make a living. Where would I get the money to give you?" There was nothing wrong with this statement, but it sounded different in Duan Luan's ears. This was because the last time they went to borrow money from Daizhou, not only did they not succeed, but they also got snubbed. In addition, the relationship between the two of them was not very good. They were the kind of enemies. When he heard this, Duan Luan felt that the other party was targeting him. He immediately strode forward and pointed at Daizhou's nose and scolded, "Daizhou." "Minister Duan, shut up." Zhang Sun Wuji quickly stepped forward. He was about to leave the palace, but when he heard these two fellows arguing, he had to come back. After pulling Duan Luan down, he said with a serious face, "Minister Duan, isn't it just money? Why are you arguing?" He also heard it clearly in the imperial court just now. It was nothing more than the matter of repairing the eastern and western markets. Duanluan flicked his sleeves and suppressed the anger in his heart. He looked at Zhongsun Wuji seriously. Lord Zhongsun, you don't know. This fellow Daizhou is unwilling to pay for the repairs. Just now His Majesty clearly asked me to repair with him. But this fellow is unwilling to pay at all. All right. Zhongsun Wuji patted Duanluan's shoulder, then looked at Daizhou and said with a serious face, Minister Dai, why are you unwilling to pay? This is what His Majesty said before. Have you forgotten? Daizhou smiled bitterly. Lord Zhongsun, it's not that I'm unwilling to pay, but the Ministry of Revenue doesn't have much money to begin with. In addition, we support the Battle of Chiotzi. How can we have extra money to repair the eastern and western markets? Aren't you making things difficult for me? When Zhongsun Wuji heard this, he frowned slightly. He had once been the Minister of Revenue and naturally knew about the situation in the Ministry of Revenue. He could guess whether Daizhou was telling the truth or not. In history, wars were the most costly, especially the Battle of Chiotzi. Thinking, he turned to look at Duanluan. Minister Duan, what do you think? Duanluan didn't answer. He just thought that this fellow Daizhou was unwilling to pay, but after listening to the conversation between Zhongsun Wuji and Duanluan, he found that he could understand Daizhou a little. However, understanding was one thing. The eastern and western markets still needed to be repaired. After all, this was His Majesty's order, and he didn't dare to disobey. After thinking about it, he cupped his hands and said, Lord Zhongsun, I was wrong just now, but the repairs of the eastern and western markets were ordered by His Majesty. This official doesn't dare to disobey. Chapter 2026. Zhongsun Wuji smiled bitterly. He was a little regretful now. Why did he jump out to be the peacemaker? Not only did he not get any benefits, but he also got himself into trouble. Duanluan had no money to repair the east and west city, and neither did Daizhou. He couldn't possibly pay for it, right? While he was distressed, a figure popped up in his mind. Fengzi. Fengzi had a big family and business, and there were so many students in the academy. Maybe he could take on this job. Besides, there was no harm in this job. It could also be a good practice for the students. Thinking of this, he glanced at the two and said with a smile, You two don't have to worry. One of you can solve the crisis of the east and west city. Ooh. Daizhou and Duanluan said in unison. Now the two of them were basically grasshoppers tied to the same rope. They were bound together for good or ill. Naturally, they were looking forward to it. Zhongsun Wuji was very satisfied with their reaction. He smiled and said, Zhang Feng. Zhang Feng? Duanluan frowned slightly. He was a little confused. How could Zhang Feng solve the crisis of the east and west city? But soon he understood something. Zhang Feng had the academy, and there were a lot of students in the academy. Before entering the academy, Zhang Feng had promised these students that if they didn't have a good job in the future, they could enter the Ministry of Works or the Ministry of Revenue. Moreover, this guy had a big family business. If Zhang Feng was willing to help, then the east and west city could be repaired immediately. Daizhou naturally understood. Zhang Feng didn't dare to say anything else, but he had a lot of money. If he was willing to take out a little money, then the repair of the east and west city could be immediately filled. But how could this guy be willing to take out the money? He turned to look at Zhongsun Wuji and said with a puzzled face, Lord Zhongsun, you are right. But how could Zhang Feng be willing to take out the money? Duanluan nodded. He had the same feeling. Wasn't it a fool's dream to ask someone to take out the money for no reason? Zhongsun Wuji smiled. Although these two old fellows were slick and sly when it came to officialdom, why were they suddenly enlightened at this time? He glanced at the two of them and said mysteriously, The academy? Doesn't he have students? Duanluan instantly understood something. Zhang Feng had promised his students that they could enter the Ministry of Revenue or the Ministry of Works after they graduated. And now he was the Minister of Works. If he were to negotiate with Zhang Feng, wouldn't it be a piece of cake? He smiled proudly and said, Thank you, Lord Zhongsun, for your guidance. I will go and find Zhang Feng now. With that, he strode out of the door. Daizhou? What Daizhou? They already had Zhang Feng. What use would a mere Daizhou have? Wasn't this guy in charge of the Ministry of Revenue? As long as he had Zhang Feng's money, Daizhou's money was not important. Besides, this old man had no money. While thinking, Duanluan's steps became more presumptuous. But Daizhou was not happy. His Majesty had already given the order. Why did this guy run away? He could not let this guy take all the benefits alone. He said to Zhangsun Wuji and hurriedly followed Duanluan's footsteps. Looking at Duanluan and Daizhou's backs, Zhangsun Wuji felt a little regretful. He felt that he had cheated Fengzi. The renovation of the East and West Market was a matter for the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of Revenue. How could they drag Fengzi into this? But this was not a bad thing. Fengzi was just giving some money. He hoped that these two fellows would not expose him when they went to Fengzi. Otherwise, he would become a sinner. Fengzi, the old man did this for your own good. Please forgive him. After comforting himself, Zhangsun Wuji walked to the imperial study. They did not speak along the way. Soon they arrived at the imperial study. Zhangsun Wuji walked straight in. He saw Li Shimin sitting on the dragon throne and reviewing memorials. He even held a cigarette, but in one hand. He looked very comfortable. Zhangsun Wuji hurriedly stepped forward and cupped his hands. Your Majesty. Li Shimin put down the memorials and glanced at Zhangsun Wuji. He said lightly, "Get up." Then he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "How is the matter between Daizhou and Duanluan going?" Zhangsun Wuji's mouth twitched. He did not know how to answer. Just now, it was his idea to let these two fellows find Madman. If Erlang knew, would he be angry? Just as he was thinking, Li Shimin's voice sounded again. Why aren't you saying anything? Could it be that those two fellows have not solved the problem in the East and West Market? No. Zhangsun Wuji replied subconsciously. But as soon as he said it, he regretted it. He was worried that if he continued, His Majesty would be unhappy. But he had already said half of what he wanted to say. If he did not continue, he would seem guilty. He could only bite the bullet and continue. Just now, Daizhou and Duanluan were arguing endlessly. I gave them an idea. Speaking of this, his face was a little red. Let them go to Fengzi. Go to Fengzi? Li Shimin frowned slightly. This was a matter between the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of Works. Why go to Fengzi? And this fellow, why did he give Duanluan and Daizhou ideas? He asked in confusion. Why did you urge Daizhou and Duanluan to go to Fengzi? Chapter 2027. Zhangsun Wuji smiled awkwardly. Just now, Daizhou said that the Ministry of Revenue didn't have much money to support the Battle of Chiotzi, and Duanluan urgently needed money to repair the East and West Market, so I gave them this idea. Well, Li Shimin nodded slightly. He now understood that his brother-in-law wanted to cheat Fengzi. However, it didn't seem to be a bad thing. First, the officials of the imperial court would owe Fengzi a favor, and Fengzi's future as an official would be much easier. Second, there were many students in Fengzi's academy, and it was time for them to gain experience. As for the money to repair the East and West Market, it was not worth mentioning to Fengzi at all. Instead, he could earn a favor. It was a good deal. It seemed that Zhangsun Wuji cheated Fengzi, but in fact, Fengzi made a lot of money. In this case, there was nothing to blame. Thinking of this, he smiled and said, You did the right thing. Don't blame yourself. Zhangsun Wuji didn't recover for a while. He thought that he might be scolded if he told Li Shimin about this matter. He didn't expect that not only was he not scolded, but he was also praised. This was really a pleasant surprise. In fact, what he didn't know was that he thought that he was on the first level. Li Erlang might not like the idea of making a madman lose some money and then scold him. However, Li Erlang was on the second level. He didn't care about the money that Zhang Feng lost at all. He only cared about the repair of the East and West Market and the favor that the officials owed Fengzi. It should be known that a favor was much more important than money. Now that Li Shimin was not angry, he was relieved and said with a smile, Thank you for your praise, Your Majesty. I did it for the sake of the Tang dynasty. Li Shimin nodded and didn't praise him much. He knew that his brother-in-law was arrogant and complacent sometimes. Then he changed the topic and said, What has Fengzi been doing recently? Hearing this, Zhang Sunwuji's interest was instantly piqued. He smiled and said, I really don't know what Fengzi has been doing recently. However, when I went to court this morning, I saw Fengzi's guards. Oh. Li Shimin put down his cigarette and looked at Zhang Sunwuji with interest. What are his guards doing? Zhang Sunwuji stroked his beard as if he was thinking about something. After a while he said, I saw Fengzi's bodyguard running around Chang'an Avenue. He was wearing steel plates and had sandbags tied to his feet. He was shouting some kind of chant that could be heard from 3 miles away. Li Shimin frowned, somewhat puzzled. He could understand running. It was nothing more than exercise. He could understand tying sandbags to his legs, but why did he have to tie steel plates to his body? She even had to chant? Why did this sound a bit like military training? However, it didn't seem like it. Soldiers didn't have the operation of tying steel plates. Fengzi was becoming more and more unfathomable. He looked at Zhang Sunwuji in confusion. Do you know what Fengzi's guards are doing? I don't know. Zhang Sunwuji shook his head and said with a puzzled expression. I only saw the guards when I went to court. I didn't ask. Li Shimin rolled his eyes at Zhang Sunwuji, somewhat speechless. He was already in front of him, but he didn't know how to ask. However, this wasn't a bad thing. At least he knew what Fengzi was doing these days. He hadn't seen this guy for a few days. He could take this opportunity to see Fengzi. Thinking of this, he raised his head and glanced at Xiao Gizi. Xiao Gizi, change clothes and leave the palace. Xiao Gizi understood and took out plain clothes to wait for orders. Li Shimin stood up and changed clothes while saying to Zhang Sunwuji, accompany me to see Fengzi later. Zhang Sunwuji quivered and subconsciously wanted to refuse. This was because he had given Daizhou and Duan Luan some advice just now. If nothing unexpected happened, these two fellows should be on their way. If they were to bump into each other in the Zhang estate, it would be a little awkward. However, on second thought, Erlang's words made sense. This wasn't completely a bad thing. At least it would give the academy students a chance to gain experience. Perhaps Fengzi would thank him. After thinking about it, he decided to go. After all, Fengzi didn't eat people. After changing clothes quickly, Li Shimin and Zhang Sunwuji got on the carriage and went to Zhang Mansion. However, they soon discovered something strange. Chang'an Avenue, which used to be packed with people, was deserted today. There were not even a few pedestrians on the road. What was even more strange was that there was no one in front of many vendors, leaving the food on the chairs. Many of the food had already been visited by sparrows. What was going on? Li Shimin turned to Zhang Sunwuji and asked curiously, why is Chang'an Avenue like this? Could it be that thieves have looted it? This was the only possibility he could think of at the moment. Chang'an was usually crowded with people. Usually it would take a few hours to go shopping. Moreover, the vendors in Chang'an valued their stalls more than their lives. How could they abandon their stalls now? There must be something wrong. Chapter 2028. But he still didn't know the reason. Faced with Li Shimin's question, Zhang Sunwuji had a bad feeling. He looked around the street, and sure enough it was deserted. Especially the glutinous rice wine stall. It was overturned. Glutinous rice wine? His eyes widened as if he remembered something. In the early hours of this morning, the guards of Zhang Mansion seemed to be drinking glutinous rice wine here. They also talked about some things in Zhang Mansion, including that madman was going to Jiangnan. Could it be the incident on Chang'an Avenue was related to Fengzi? He gasped and turned to Li Shimin. He said carefully, Your Majesty, it might be related to Fengzi. Fengzi? Li Shimin frowned and asked in confusion. How is it related to Fengzi? Zhang Sunwuji narrowed his eyes. In the early hours of this morning, I vaguely heard the guards of Zhang Mansion say that Fengzi was going to leave. Hearing this, Li Shimin seemed to understand something. Fengzi was going to leave, and then the people of Chang'an were going to see Fengzi. Now this was the only explanation. Otherwise, how could the scene on Chang'an Avenue be explained? But soon he felt something was wrong. If the people all went to Fengzi's house, would Fengzi be in danger? He turned to the coachman and said quickly, "Speed up, hurry up." The coachman didn't hesitate. He waved his whip and the horses neighed. They went straight to Zhang Mansion. But not long after, the coachman said, "Master, there's a jam in front." Li Shimin frowned and reached out to lift the curtain of the sedan chair. He saw that the roadside was crowded with pedestrians. There were peddlers, merchants, scholars, and even some child beggars. Almost everyone that could be seen in Chang'an was here. In their hands, there were things like eggs, pancakes, and books. It looked like they were there to deliver gifts. If only the old man had such a big crowd when he left. Zhang Sunwuji stroked his beard and sighed from the bottom of his heart. Indeed, Fengzi was about to go to Jiangnan, and so many people had come. This was enough to show Fengzi's position among the common people. However, Li Shimin wasn't in the mood to lament about this. He rolled his eyes at Zhang Sunwuji and asked, "How do we get to the Zhang residence now?" "This." Zhang Sunwuji smiled awkwardly and glanced outside the window. He turned to look at Li Shimin and said faintly, "There are so many people on the road now. I'm afraid that the carriage won't be able to pass through. It seems that we can only walk." Walk. Li Shimin frowned slightly. To be honest, he was not willing to walk. After all, he was used to having a high bed and soft pillow for a long time. He was still repulsed by the sudden need to walk through the crowd. However, looking at the current situation, he was afraid that he had to walk. He sighed and could only say, "Then let's walk." Chapter 2029. Li Shimin saw that there was no other way and rushed into the crowd without saying anything. Zhang Sunwuji did not dare to delay, and rushed forward to make a path for his brother-in-law. After a while, the two finally arrived at the door. The noise and curses were endless. Li Shimin could only turn a deaf ear and talk to the guard. "Where's your master?" "What did you say? I can't hear you. Where's your master?" "Oh, he's at home. Let me in." Fortunately, the guard recognized Li Shimin. Otherwise, who knew how much effort it would take? After entering the residence, the guard led Li Shimin to the main hall. As soon as he entered the main hall, he saw Zhang Feng sitting on a chair with a cigarette in his hand. He was smoking and looking very comfortable. Li Shimin quickly went forward and pulled Zhang Feng up. He shouted anxiously, "Fengzi, your door is in such a mess and you're still smoking here? Laoli, why are you here?" Zhang Feng looked at Li Shimin curiously. However, he soon realized that he was focusing on the wrong thing. He shook his sleeves and sat back on the chair. He said helplessly, "What can I do? I didn't want to leak the news, but I can't control people's mouths." Speaking of this, he snorted and said discontentedly, "The guards at home didn't keep their mouths shut. It's also my fault. I didn't explain it clearly to those guys. That's why people are blocking the door now." "You feel wronged?" Li Shimin raised his eyebrows and found it funny. "So many people came to see you. This is such a great honor. You're still throwing a tantrum? Yes, you don't know how lucky you are." Zhang Sunwuji snorted and looked at Zhang Feng with dissatisfaction. On what basis? Why did this kid have so many people sending him to Jiangnan? Why didn't anyone send him when he went to other places to take up his post? It's fine if they sent him, but why did this kid hide in the main hall and refuse to see anyone? He was a classic example of someone who didn't know how to appreciate good intentions. Looking at their cold gazes, Zhang Feng couldn't stand it anymore. He quickly got up and helped them sit down before saying, "You don't have to be jealous of me." "Who the hell is jealous of you?" Zhang Sunwuji almost jumped up. Fortunately, Li Shimin quickly held him down. Otherwise, this guy would have definitely started a fight with Zhang Feng. I'm not jealous, okay?" Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Zhang Sunwuji. Then he glanced at the door and said faintly, "Of course, I know that the commoners are here to see me. I also want to go out and meet everyone. It's just that there are too many commoners here. I heard that the door is blocked. If I go out now, wouldn't I be torn apart alive?" As he spoke, he sat down on the chair and took a deep puff of his cigarette before continuing, "I'd better stay at home and wait for the commoners to leave before going out." "Nonsense." Li Shimin frowned and looked at Zhang Feng with dissatisfaction. The commoners came to see you because they have high hopes for you. Why are you hiding at home? Besides, there are so many commoners outside now. What if something happens? You should go out and meet the commoners, then dismiss them." Zhang Feng smiled awkwardly and didn't reply. In fact, he also wanted to dismiss the commoners, but he was worried that if he went out, the commoners' emotions would rise again. This way, the situation would be even more difficult to deal with. If someone died, it would be difficult to clean up. However, if he didn't go out, the commoners would continue to gather at the door. After thinking about it, he decided to go out. After making up his mind, he looked at Li Shimin. "You're right. I can only solve this if I go out." As he spoke, he stood up and walked to the front yard. The servant at the door was holding the door. When he saw the master, he quickly said, "Master, the commoners want to come in. What do we do now?" Du Ziting was also very anxious. "Master, the area is completely blocked. Why don't you?" Zhang Feng waved his hand to tell Du Ziting to stop. He then looked at the servant. "Open the door. I'll go out and take a look." "Master, it might be dangerous to go out now. There are so many commoners." Du Ziting looked worriedly at Zhang Feng. Normally, it was a good thing that the commoners came to see the master. However, when there were too many people, it became a bad thing because no one knew what kind of danger would occur. "Don't worry." Zhang Feng didn't care. He smiled. "It's a good thing that the commoners came to see me. I can't let the commoners feel disappointed." Du Ziting nodded. He knew the relationship between the two. The commoners coming to see the master meant that they loved the master. It would be inappropriate if they didn't go out. However, there were too many people going out. If there was danger, it would be over. He glanced at the servants. "Later, open the door and protect the master. Remember, don't leave his side." The servants all nodded. Du Ziting was relieved. He waved his hand to open the door. As the main door was opened, a series of screams could be heard coming in. "Prince Zhang, we're here to see you." "Prince Zhang." Du Ziting hesitated. He turned his head to look at Zhang Feng. Zhang Feng didn't care. He waved his hand to open the door. Chapter 2030. When the door was fully opened, a sea of people came into view. Many common people and businessmen were holding all kinds of things in their hands, such as eggs, braised meat, silk, and so on. They stood at the door together. Some of them could not stand anymore, so they climbed on the stone lions in front of the mansion. Some children climbed directly on the locust trees, like monkeys looking at the sea. When they saw the person they missed coming out, they immediately lost control of their emotions and kept shouting, "Prince Zhang, I'm Huzi. You drank my family's fermented glutinous rice before. This time, we heard that you were leaving, so we came to see you. President Zhang, I heard that you were leaving, so I specially brought my 30-year-old cured meat to give to you. Prince Zhang, I brought you braised meat. You must accept it." Everyone carried their gifts and kept squeezing in front of Zhang Feng. For a moment, the whole street was blocked. The people in front seemed to have been stepped on, and there were bursts of crying and shouting. Seeing this, Zhang Feng only felt a chill on his back. He did not expect the people of Chang'an to be so crazy. He quickly waved his hand and shouted, "Everyone stop." His words seemed to have magic power. As soon as they were heard, the crowd stopped restless, but there were still some people whispering, but it did not matter. Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd and said solemnly, "I know you value me. This time I'm going to Jiangnan to develop, but you don't have to worry, because I'm going to bring the prosperity of Chang'an to Jiangnan." Good, good. Just as they were talking, a Buddhist chant came from the crowd. Zhang Feng frowned and was a little dissatisfied. He hated to be disturbed in the middle of a speech, especially by a monk. He opened his eyes wide, trying to find the speaker and ask for clarification. The crowd also cast sidelong glances and felt dissatisfied. Although the Tang Empire had always worshipped Buddha, and the people were also in awe of Buddha, they were now listening to young Master Zhang's wise words. How could they allow a monk to disturb them? Not to mention that young Master Zhang was about to leave, and they might not be able to hear these wise words in the future. Thinking of this, a ball of nameless anger seemed to ignite in the hearts of the people, and they were determined to find the troublemaker. But at this moment, that voice rang out again. Everyone says that Prince Zhang is a very kind person. Now that I've met you in person, it's true that your reputation is not as good as your appearance. Excellent. Hearing this, Zhang Feng was a little confused. He couldn't tell if the other party was praising him or insulting him. Just as he was about to ask, he saw a man in a yellow monk's robe walk out from the crowd. This man had 6 scars on his head. He had a benevolent face and his palms were clasped together. He looked like a Buddhist monk. This is Master Xuanzang? Someone seemed to have recognized the monk and exclaimed. With this exclamation, the whole place seemed to be in an uproar. They all looked at the man called Xuanzang. Soon the people imitated Xuanzang. They clasped their palms together and chanted the name of Amitabha to Xuanzang. Their eyes were slowly filled with piety. Xuanzang seemed to be enjoying the crowd's attention. For a moment, he forgot about Zhang Feng and started chatting with the people about Buddhism. Seeing this, Zhang Feng finally understood. This guy was Tang Sanzang, but it would be more appropriate to call him Xuanzang. But why did this guy come to the entrance of Zhang Mansion? Also, what this guy said just now was a little confusing. What did he mean? Just as he was thinking, Du Ziting quietly came up. Master, this Xuanzang is the monk chosen by His Majesty at the Water and Land Conference a few days ago. I heard that he's going to India to collect the Buddhist scriptures. Water and Land Conference? Zhang Feng was slightly taken aback and instantly understood something. Previously, due to the Chang'an city incident, Li Shimin had no choice but to issue an edict and call for a Water and Land Conference. This Water and Land Conference was no doubt a springboard for Xuanzang. From then on, Buddhism in the Tang dynasty became more prosperous. The price was to go to India to collect the Mahayana Buddhist scriptures and use them to release more souls. Since it was a fact that Xuanzang was going to India, he couldn't let such a good resource go to waste. Now that India and the Tang dynasty were in a stalemate, if 1 or 2 spies were sent over, they might be able to obtain some top-secret information. And this spy must be Xuanzang. First of all, this guy was a monk. It would not be easy to arouse suspicion. Moreover, he had a very strong purpose this time, which was to obtain the Mahayana Buddhist scriptures. This purpose alone would allow him to avoid many interrogations in India. If this guy defected and became a professional spy of the Tang dynasty in India, then the odds of winning against India would be much higher. He would also be able to foresee the future. Thinking about this, he looked at Xuanzang and smiled maliciously. Master Xuanzang, I've heard a lot about you. Xuanzang was chatting with his followers. When he heard someone calling him, he slowly turned around and faced Zhang Feng. He put his palms together and said indifferently, Prince Zhang, I've heard a lot about you. Zhang Feng laughed in his heart. Pretend? Go ahead and pretend for Lao Tzu. This Buddhist is so damn good at pretending. However, his face was still calm. He said lightly, Master Xuanzang, since you've come to my humble abode today, why don't you come in and let me be the host? Chapter 2031. Xuanzang smiled and nodded. Amitabha, young Master Zhang is a kind and benevolent man. You are a blessing to the people of Chang'an. It is my honor to be invited. How can I refuse? Xuanzang lifted his trousers and walked toward Zhang Mansion. Zhang Feng was overjoyed. He extended his hand and gestured for Xuanzang to enter. Xuanzang nodded and prepared to enter. However, the people behind him were a little unwilling. They came here to see Prince Zhang. Now that Xuanzang was here, Prince Zhang didn't say anything. How could they agree? So the crowd was in a mess again and started shouting. Prince Zhang, don't go. You haven't finished your words, Prince Zhang. The crowd was in high spirits and kept waving their hands. They were like the audience of a modern concert. However, Zhang Feng was not a singer. He turned his head and looked around at the crowd. He waved his hand and motioned for them to stop. Then he said seriously, Dear people of Chang'an, I know that you love me very much. This time, I am going to Jiangnan to seek benefits for the Tang Empire. So don't worry and go home. After he finished speaking, the crowd was quiet for a moment. But soon, they became restless again. Prince Zhang, accept my braised meat. Prince Zhang, I'm giving you fermented glutinous rice. I'm giving you eggs. The crowd raised the gifts in their hands and rushed to the front, as if they were afraid of being left behind. Everyone be quiet. Zhang Feng saw that the crowd was a little chaotic and quickly stopped them. Then he glanced at the crowd and said, I'll accept the gifts. Don't push so that people don't die. In fact, these gifts were dispensable to him. The key was that if the people gathered at the door for a long time, people would die. If he accepted the gifts, the people might leave. This way, the danger would be greatly reduced. This method was indeed effective. The commoners stopped their chaos and stood in their original positions in an orderly manner. Zhang Feng nodded in satisfaction. Then he looked at Du Ziting and said, Take me to collect the gifts. We have to record everyone's name, gift and residence. Du Ziting nodded slightly. He knew that Old Master wanted to record the information of every citizen who gave gifts, so that it would be convenient for him to help or return the gifts in the future. Old Master was like this. If someone treated him well, he would treat them well. After giving his orders, Zhang Feng led Xuanzang into the mansion. As soon as he stepped into the residence, Xuanzang couldn't keep his cool. White cotton was spread all over the front yard, and there were many servants plucking the cotton. Although he had seen cotton-padded clothes before, he had never seen how cotton-padded clothes were made with his own eyes. He couldn't help but be curious. He walked forward and looked at Zhang Feng. He asked curiously, Prince Zhang, is this how cotton-padded clothes are made? Zhang Feng was overjoyed. No matter how knowledgeable you are in the future, you are still dumbfounded. However, he didn't pretend to be proud. Instead, he smiled and said, Yes, these are the cotton-padded clothes that are popular in Chang'an. What do you think, Master Xuanzang? Xuanzang nodded slightly and smiled. Almsgiver Zhang is kind and generous. I believe that Buddha will bless you for the good of the people. He had heard of Zhang Feng's reputation before and thought that he was a kind and talented person. Today, not only did his understanding of Zhang Feng completely change, he also believed that Zhang Feng was a person who loved and protected the people. Now he only had respect for him. Of course, Zhang Feng didn't know this. He smiled and said, Master Xuanzang, you must be joking. Please come to the hall. With that, Zhang Feng led Xuanzang to the main hall. Xuanzang reluctantly looked at the cotton and followed Zhang Feng to the hall. As soon as he entered the hall, Xuanzang was stunned because he saw someone. It was Li Shimin. His mind was in a mess. Why is His Majesty here? Prince Zhang may have some reputation, but it shouldn't be enough for His Majesty to come here, right? Just as he was wondering, he realized something. His Majesty was wearing plain clothes? And Lord Zhangsun was also wearing plain clothes? Could it be that His Majesty was out in plain clothes? Was there something going on between Prince Zhang and His Majesty? Or did His Majesty come to see Prince Zhang in plain clothes? Or did Prince Zhang not know His Majesty's identity? He didn't dare to think about it, and just made random guesses. However, the awkward side appeared. How could he greet His Majesty? If he directly addressed His Majesty, it would be a sin if he ruined His Majesty's plans. But if he didn't address His Majesty as His Majesty, it would be disrespectful. Just as he was confused, Li Shimin walked up and gave Xuanzang a look. He smiled and said, You must be the famous Master Xuanzang in Chang'an? When Xuanzang first came in, he was also shocked. Fortunately, this guy was stunned. Otherwise, he wouldn't know what to say. Xuanzang wasn't stupid. When he saw Li Shimin's look and words, he understood what was going on. He nodded and put his palms together. I am Xuanzang. May I know who you are? Chapter 2032. This was a classic case of asking the obvious. Both of them knew what was going on. Poor Zhang Feng didn't know anything, and thought that this was the first time the two of them had met. He quickly stepped forward to introduce them. Xuanzang, this is Master Li. He's a businessman. The one surnamed Sun is also a businessman. As he spoke, Zhang Feng waved for everyone to take a seat. Xuanzang sat down. He was now certain that Zhang Feng didn't know His Majesty's identity. He didn't even know Lord Zhangsuan's identity. But why did His Majesty come to Zhang Feng? And why did he hide his identity? Just as he was wondering, Zhang Feng spoke again. Master Xuanzang, I heard that you hosted the Water and Land Conference last time? Xuanzang paused and didn't immediately reply. He glanced at Li Shimin. Because the conference was hosted by him, he didn't dare to speak without his permission. Li Shimin also sensed Xuanzang's dilemma and gave him a reassuring look. Xuanzang relaxed and put his palms together. Almsgiver Zhang, I did host the Water and Land Conference last time. What advice does Prince Zhang have for me? I can't say that I've taught you anything. Zhang Feng smiled and turned to Li Shimin. His face fell. Lao Li, come with me and see if the tea is ready. Tea? Li Shimin paused. He had been sitting here for a long time and the tea hadn't been served. Why did Xuanzang want to see if the tea was ready? Besides, the tea was made by the maids. Why did he want him to see it? In an instant he seemed to understand something. This kid must have something to say to him, and wanted to go out on purpose. That should be it. Otherwise, why would he find such a clumsy excuse? Thinking of this, he still followed Zhang Feng out of the door. Xuanzang, on the other hand, was stunned. It was because Zhang Feng addressed Li Shimin as such. Lao Li? Without years of friendship, no one would call him that. But His Majesty didn't seem to care at all. Even Lord Zhongsun, who was usually the most protective of His Majesty, did not say a word? Strange, this was too strange. He felt like his head was in a mess. He wanted to ask Zhongsun Wuji, who was in meditation, but he was afraid that he would say something wrong. He could only pray in his heart. Amitabha, Buddha bless me. On the other hand, Zhang Feng led Li Shimin to a side room. Seeing that there was no one around, he carefully closed the door. Fengzi, what are you doing? Why are you acting like a thief? Li Shimin looked at Zhang Feng in confusion. Don't be noisy. Zhang Feng turned to look at Li Shimin. Seeing that no one was around, he asked, Lao Li, do you know who Xuanzang is? Li Shimin was amused. What status could Xuanzang have? Isn't he just a monk? He's not just a monk. Zhang Feng stared at Li Shimin solemnly. Last time he hosted the Water and Land Conference and was greatly appreciated by His Majesty. I heard that he's going to India to get the scriptures soon. Li Shimin was slightly stunned. Zhang Feng was well informed. Indeed, during the last Water and Land Conference, Xuanzang talked about Hinayana Buddhism and said that it could release the souls of the dead. This instantly attracted the attention of the people below the stage. The Tang dynasty worshipped Buddhism. With Xuanzang's lecture, the people quickly became restless. They all asked Xuanzang if he could release the living from their suffering. Xuanzang said that he needed the Mahayana Buddhism, and this Mahayana Buddhism was far away in India. The people naturally desired the Mahayana Buddhism, and they all petitioned Li Shimin. In response to the people's voices, Li Shimin ordered Xuanzang to go to India to get the Mahayana Buddhism. Originally, the Tang dynasty and India were in a stalemate. Whether or not they could get the scriptures was still uncertain. However, this method did indeed stabilize the people's hearts. Xuanzang was also willing to go to India. Both sides were happy. However, what Li Shimin couldn't figure out was that Fengzi called him over just to talk about Xuanzang. What was there to talk about? He replied impatiently. Yes, he hosted the Water and Land Conference. He'll probably go to India in half a month. What does this have to do with you? Of course it has nothing to do with me. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Li Shimin. Then he glanced in the direction of India and said with a serious face, although it has nothing to do with me, it has something to do with the Tang dynasty. Think about it, what's the relationship between the Tang dynasty and India now? If Xuanzang is in India. Hearing this, Li Shimin suddenly understood. He didn't become the emperor only because of his strength. He also had wisdom that others couldn't match. Zhang Feng had only said half of it, but he had already understood the gist of it. Xuanzang was going to India. Now the Tang dynasty and India were in a stalemate. To put it bluntly, they weren't on good terms. What if Xuanzang went to India to ask for information? This was undoubtedly the best help for the Tang dynasty. However, Xuanzang was a monk. How could he do such a thing? He looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled face. Fengzi, I understand what you're saying. But Xuanzang is a monk. Why would he be willing to work for you and me? Zhang Feng smiled confidently. Don't worry about that. I'll convince Xuanzang later. You just have to beat around the bush and say a few words for me. I promise I'll have a way. Chapter 2033. Li Shimin did not know what Zhang Feng was up to, but seeing how confident he was, he did not say anything. Furthermore, Xuanzang knew his identity. He believed that with his words, it would be easier for Xuanzang to betray him. He nodded. All right, I will act according to your wishes. Zhang Feng nodded, opened the door and walked towards the main hall. Xuanzang was still thinking about the relationship between Zhang Feng and Li Shimin. When he saw them return, he hurriedly stood up. Almsgiver Zhang, Almsgiver Li, you are back. Zhang Feng smiled. Please have a seat, venerable one. The tea will be served soon. Although making tea was an excuse, he could not just sit there and do nothing. That was why he ordered the servants to make tea when he came over. Xuanzang nodded and glanced at Li Shimin. Seeing that there was nothing wrong, he turned and sat down. He then looked at Zhang Feng and smiled. Almsgiver Zhang, I saw many cotton-padded clothes in the front yard. They must be in high demand. His face turned red. I have a presumptuous request. I wonder if Almsgiver Zhang could sell some to the monks of the Great Mercy Temple? To resist the cold? The Great Mercy Temple was where he cultivated. There were many pilgrims there. He could use some money to buy cotton-padded clothes. Hearing Xuanzang's words, Zhang Feng was overjoyed. He wanted to drink milk. The mother of his child was here. He was still thinking about how to get into the conversation with Xuanzang, but this guy came knocking on his door. As long as he gave the cotton-padded clothes to him, Xuanzang would owe him a favor. It would be easier to negotiate later. After making up his mind, he smiled and pretended to be a savior. Venerable Xuanzang, you are too kind. Although I am not a Buddhist, I am a Buddhist. Since the monks of the Great Mercy Temple need cotton-padded clothes, how can it be a transaction? I am willing to give them to the monks of the Great Mercy Temple. That being said, Lin Fan was overjoyed. If Xuanzang wanted cotton clothes, he must have a need for them. Lin Fan was lacking in everything but cotton clothes. If he gave these cotton clothes to Xuanzang, Xuanzang would definitely fall for it. Li Shimin despised Zhang Feng in his heart, because he knew that this guy was full of nonsense. What did he mean by liking Buddhism? Who was he trying to fool? He had never seen this guy read a book about Buddhism. Moreover, he was so indulgent in meat and wine. Did he look like someone who loved Buddhism? However, he didn't expose Xuanzang. After all, he also hoped that Zhang Feng could fool Xuanzang, so that he could go to India to gather information. As for the Mahayana Sutra, wasn't that simple? When India was destroyed, what Mahayana Sutra would they not have? He could even get his hands on top-grade sutras. Even if they couldn't destroy India, as long as Xuanzang was fooled, he would definitely be a thorn in India's side. Chapter 2034. He looked at Xuanzang and asked seriously, Master Xuanzang, why are you going to India this time? Do you know how far it will be? Is it easy to encounter misfortune? Upon hearing this, Xuanzang's interest was piqued. He straightened his posture and looked in the direction of India. Then he looked at Zhang Feng and said solemnly, I'm going to India to obtain the Mahayana Sutra. I'm going to release the souls of those who have been wronged. As for the journey, he frowned and continued, I don't know how far it will be, but I won't give up. I want to obtain the sutra. Even if there are wolves, tigers, leopards, and bandits along the way, they won't change my mind. Li Shimin looked at Xuanzang with admiration. He thought to himself that he had chosen the right person. Although these were all empty words to him, they sounded exactly like the truth. Furthermore, Xuanzang's face was filled with sincerity, which made him feel even more confident. There was even a moment when he did not want to instigate Xuanzang. But on second thought, how could a monk be more important than India? He should still be a spy. Besides, Xuanzang was less likely to arouse suspicion. Zhang Feng felt the same way. He even wanted to give this guy a thumbs up. The journey to the west was 50,000 miles. That was still considered a small number. If you added in the wasted roads, it would be more than 90,000 miles. Who would have the willpower to persevere? But this guy in front of him did it. He had to admit that this was worthy of admiration. However, no matter how powerful this guy was, he could not avoid being a spy at Zhang Mansion today. Zhang Mansion smiled and asked, Master Xuanzang, how do you know that the Mahayana Sutra can release souls from their suffering? Have you seen it before? He dared to ask this because he was sure that Xuanzang had never seen the Mahayana Sutra. Before Xuanzang came back from his journey to the west, there was no Mahayana Sutra in the Tang dynasty. Later, this guy took the sutra and put it in the Wild Goose Pagoda. It was true that Xuanzang had never seen Mahayana Buddhism, but he didn't seem to mind Zhang Feng's question. He just smiled and said, Almsgiver Zhang, you must be joking. This poor monk may not have seen Mahayana Buddhism, but I've heard countless monks talk about its wonders. Although he said that, his mind was already racing. That's right, I haven't seen the Mahayana Buddhist Dharma before. Is this Mahayana Buddhist Dharma as magical as the legends say? For a moment, he had a trace of doubt. But he quickly dismissed the thought because he felt that he was a monk and couldn't have such doubts. Also, he was about to go to India and couldn't have such thoughts. Zhang Feng seemed to have noticed something and looked at Xuanzang with a faint smile. Master, you just said that you've only heard about it from others and have never seen it with your own eyes. This means that you don't know the wonders of the Mahayana Sutra at all. Can it release souls from their suffering? Can it allow people to go to paradise? If you don't know these, how can you get the West Sutra? This, Xuanzang frowned and didn't know how to answer. Indeed, he didn't know anything that Zhang Feng asked. First of all, he had never seen the Mahayana Sutra, so it was even more impossible for him to know if it could release souls from their suffering. However, he intuitively believed that the Mahayana Buddhist Dharma must be so magical. This was the intuition of a monk. However, facing Zhang Feng's question, it wasn't appropriate for him to not answer. He could only answer stubbornly. Almsgiver Zhang, this penniless monk really doesn't know what you just said. However, this penniless monk still believes that Mahayana Buddhism can release vengeful souls from purgatory, and can also send people to nirvana. Zhang Feng felt a little helpless. What a stubborn fellow. But then again, which monk wasn't stubborn? However, this was not a problem for him. He smiled and continued, Master Xuanzang, let's put this aside for now. Can you tell me what the Pure Land is? Xuanzang immediately perked up and clasped his hands together. The Western Paradise is also known as the Pure Land of Bliss, the 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 Land of Bliss. Henceforth, the world headed west. After passing through 1 trillion Buddhist lands, one would reach the Pure Land of Bliss. Regarding the situation of this Pure Land, there is a detailed explanation in the Amitabha Sutra, and Amitabha Buddha is still teaching there today. According to the Amitabha Sutra, those who are born in this Pure Land will experience various kinds of happiness. For example, their bodies are like the 32 faces of Buddha, and they have 5 eyes and 6 supernatural powers. The relationship between the 5 senses is very subtle, and the heart is relaxed and refreshed. They listen to the Dharma in their heart and worship the Buddha and Bodhisattva, and they will be enlightened. However, in this Pure Land, there are so-called borderlands, doubtful cities, womb palaces, and so on. These are the places where the saviors of Amitabha Buddha will be born. No. Zhang Feng smiled and said seriously, the Pure Land should be a place where there are no disputes in the world, where there are no differences in culture, where there are no conflicts between people, where there are only virtuous and capable people, and where there is harmony. Old friends don't only have relatives, and children don't only have children, so that the old have a purpose, the strong have a purpose, the young have a strong point, and the lonely have a purpose. There is a place for men and a place for women. Evil goods should be discarded from the ground, and there is no need to hide them. Evil forces should not come from the body, and there is no need to do it for oneself. It is a place where conspiracy is closed but not flourishing, where theft is not done, and where outsiders are not closed. This is the Pure Land. As for what you said, it is a virtual world, and it can't be realized. Chapter 2035. No conflict in the world? Xuanzang was stunned. No difference in culture? No conflict in the world? These words kept pouring into his mind like a bucket of water. Yes, as long as there was no conflict in the world, people would be able to enjoy bliss even if they didn't go to the Western paradise. Now that the world was divided and reunited, there were endless wars. Didn't he become a monk to find a pure land for people? If there was no conflict in the world, the Western scripture wouldn't be important. There was no difference in culture. As long as everyone could read and use the same language, there would be no obstacles in communication, and wars wouldn't happen easily. One had to know that many wars were caused by disagreements and not being able to understand each other's language. If there were really no cultural differences, then there wouldn't be wars and people wouldn't die. But how could this be achieved? As long as there were people, there would be wars. This was inevitable. But since almsgiver Zhang said so, did he have a corresponding solution? He looked at Zhang Feng expectantly. Almsgiver Zhang, what you said just now is really wise. How can we do it? It's very simple. Zhang Feng smiled. As long as there is no war in the world, it can be done. The corner of Xuanzang's mouth twitched. He felt helpless. He knew there was no war, but how to do it was the most difficult. He asked again with a sincere face. Almsgiver Zhang, I know there is no war. But how can we do it? Zhang Feng looked at Li Shimin. They were finally getting to the point. He smiled and turned to look at Xuanzang. He said seriously, now there are wars around the Tang dynasty. Only by quelling these wars can we do it. First of all, the Turks, Tubo, Tuyuhan and India. As long as the Tang dynasty quells these wars, the people of the Tang dynasty may go to the Western paradise. After hearing this, Li Shimin really wanted to give Zhang Feng a thumbs up. Don't be fooled by this brat's usual playfulness. When it came to tricking people, he was like an old sow wearing a bra, one set after another. Even he was almost stunned by this kid. He didn't believe that Xuanzang would remain unmoved. He turned to look at Xuanzang. He saw that Xuanzang was stunned. He frowned and didn't say anything. In fact, Xuanzang was struggling in his heart. When he heard Zhang Feng's words, his first thought was that they were wise. However, after carefully tasting it, he felt that something was not quite right. However, he could not figure out what was wrong, so he began to think about it. Until now, he still could not figure it out. Zhang Feng was clearly enjoying this process. He looked at Xuanzang playfully and said, Master Xuanzang, there are bound to be casualties in war. You know this even if I don't tell you. Many men have lost their arms, legs, and even their lives because of war. Do you want such tragedies to continue? No, Xuanzang replied. Xuanzang replied subconsciously. As a monk, he could not bear to see or even hear about killing. However, he was just a monk. Other than teaching others to be kind and preaching, there was nothing he could do to stop the killings. He looked at Zhang Feng helplessly and said, But I am just a monk. I can only teach others to be kind. How can I stop the killings? You can, Zhang Feng said firmly. He looked at Xuanzang seriously. Think about it. Aren't you going to India this time? India is at war with the Tang dynasty. You just have to persuade them to reduce the killing. Even if they withdraw, you can bring back some useful information to the Tang dynasty. Isn't that enough to stop the killing? Li Shimin was dumbfounded. At this moment, he really felt that this Feng Zi was like a preacher, fooling Xuanzang with a straight face. Most importantly, this silly monk was slow to react, and it took him a long time to react. If Li Shimin knew about MLM, he would think that Zhang Feng was an elite in MLM. It would be a pity if he didn't go into MLM with his eloquence. Li Shimin wasn't the only one who was stunned. Xuanzang was too. At first, he was fascinated. He didn't have any problems. He was a monk and he was going to India. If he taught people to be kind there, it might be effective. But later, he felt that something was wrong. He had to bring back some useful information to the Tang dynasty. Why did it feel like treason? It felt like he was a spy. What was going on? Soon he understood. He was being asked to be a spy. His face changed and he quickly asked, Almsgiver Zhang, you don't want me to be a spy, do you? As a monk, although he had always been responsible for teaching others to be kind, he had never thought of being a spy. After all, It was against the teachings of his religion. What Zhang Feng didn't expect was that this seemingly slow-witted monk's mind was actually so sharp. He even saw through his intentions in an instant. Chapter 2036. However, he did not panic. Instead, he continued to persuade him calmly. Master Xuanzang, you misunderstood me. How could I ask you to be a spy? I'm telling you how to send the people of the Tang dynasty to Elysium. Think about it. Now India is at war with the Tang dynasty. As long as the war doesn't stop, the people of the Tang dynasty will be in deep trouble. I believe you don't want to see that, do you? And you're about to go to India. As long as you send some information to the Great Tang, won't you be saving the people of the Great Tang? You'll be saving the men protecting the Great Tang on the battlefield. All you have to do is pay attention, and you might be able to save thousands of lives. Are you not willing to save the people of the Great Tang? Xuanzang was stunned. Just now, he thought that almsgiver Zhang was asking him to be a spy. But after hearing what he said, he suddenly felt that everything was wrong. The Tang dynasty was indeed at war with India, and he was going to India. It was a very common thing, but in almsgiver Zhang's words, it seemed to be related to the people of the world. Indeed, the war between the Tang dynasty and India had been going on for a long time. If he went to India and got all the useful information, he might be able to save countless people. There was no difference between preaching and sending information. If more people could be saved by sending information, it seemed more reliable to send information. The doctrine was dead, but human life was alive. If it could save people, what was the harm in offending it once? And almsgiver Zhang's words were so reasonable. After making up his mind, he looked at Zhang Feng seriously and said, Almsgiver Zhang, what you said is reasonable. I'm willing to go to India to send information. Then he frowned and said, but I'm afraid it's difficult for me to complete the task alone. Don't worry. Zhang Feng waved his hand and said with a smile, when the time comes, I'll arrange guards for you. You can order them around. As soon as he said that, Xuanzang's admiration for Zhang Feng was like a surging river. Isn't such a selfless person worthy of admiration? She had only met him by chance, but he was actually willing to give her a bodyguard, and even wholeheartedly for the sake of the world. He even felt that his merit from going to India to obtain the Buddhist scriptures was incomparable to the other parties. Almsgiver Zhang, please allow this poor monk to become your disciple. Xuanzang stood up and saluted Zhang Feng respectfully. This wasn't an impulsive decision, but an emotional one. Almsgiver Zhang's selfless spirit was hard to come by. He was no different from a saint. Li Shiming was stunned. He was just watching the show when Xuanzang suddenly stood up and said he wanted to be Feng Zi's disciple. What the F***ck was going on? Li Shiming was stunned. Chapter 2037. Zhang Feng smiled. Xuanzang finally understood. He looked at Xuanzang seriously and said, Xuanzang, the first thing you need to do when you go to India is to make friends with the local Buddhists. You should know that Buddhism is the national religion in India. You can participate in national and political affairs. As long as you make friends with the local Buddhists, you might be able to get some information. This Xuanzang was hesitant. He was a monk, and a monk who adhered to his principles. It was indeed difficult for him to make friends with the Buddhists in India. Zhang Feng saw Xuanzang's hesitation and quickly said, Xuanzang, don't you want to save the people of the Tang dynasty? You must know that your information could save tens of thousands of lives and soldiers. It might even resolve the conflict between the two countries. Save tens of thousands of lives and soldiers? Resolve the conflict between the two countries? Xuanzang was shocked. He felt his blood boiling. Why did he become a monk? Wasn't it to save the people? If what Master said was true, then he would have done a great service. He nodded without hesitation and said, Master, I am willing to go. Zhang Feng was overjoyed. He smiled and said, Good. When the time comes, Master will arrange for guards to protect you. Xuanzang nodded. His heart had already flown to India, wandering in the world of salvation. Li Shimin gave Zhang Feng a look of admiration. To be honest, this was the first time he met someone who was so good at talking. Even the officials in the imperial court were not as good as Zhang Feng. Moreover, Xuanzang actually believed him. It was really strange. However, this was a good thing. As long as Xuanzang went to India, it was equivalent to stabbing a thorn in India's side. It would be impossible to pull it out in the future. Master, since the matter is settled, I will take my leave. Xuanzang stood up. He had to go back and prepare for his trip to India. Leaving so soon? Zhang Feng looked reluctant. In fact, he had long wanted this guy to leave. Although this cheap disciple was a good person, he was a little dull and talkative. Zhang Feng couldn't stand it, but he couldn't show it because he still needed this guy to go to India. He could only force a smile and said, I wanted to talk to you through the night. I didn't expect you to leave so soon. Xuanzang put his palms together and said sincerely, Master, I have to go back and prepare for my trip to India. I will listen to your teachings when I come back. When you come back? Zhang Feng deliberately raised his voice and looked at Xuanzang with a sad face. We have just met today and we have to leave. How long do I have to wait? Li Shimin's mouth twitched as he watched from the side. He didn't believe that Feng Zi would have such deep feelings for Xuanzang on their first meeting. He even put on a sorrowful expression. He was obviously trying to bribe Xuanzang. Chapter 2038. At this point he suddenly changed the topic. This is the route I originally prepared for you, but now that Chiotzi City is in a state of war, you have to bypass Chiotzi City and go through it from the side. Look at the map. There should be a small path here. You will see the desert after you pass through it. After a few days, you will reach India. When you get the information in India, you will return and wait for me at the port of Tang Empire a year later. Before Xuanzang could say anything, Li Shimin asked, Feng Zi, why did you ask Xuanzang to go to the port? Zhang Feng smiled faintly. Laoli, did you forget about the steamship I mentioned before? It will be ready in a few days. When Xuanzang is at the port, the steamship will be able to pass through. As he spoke, he picked up the map on the table and handed it to Xuanzang. Xuanzang, this is a map that I drew for you. With your speed and the help of your guards, it will take you at most a year to return. Don't worry. Xuanzang took the map excitedly. His emotions were indescribable. He bowed to Zhang Feng and said, Thank you, Master. Zhang Feng waved his hand and said, You are welcome. This is what I should do. The more Zhang Feng acted like this, the more excited and grateful Xuanzang was. He felt as if his heart was about to fly to India. Master, I cannot thank you enough. Please allow me to thank you when I return. After that, he bowed deeply to Zhang Feng and Li Shimin and left. Zhang Feng looked at Xuanzang's back and sighed in relief. He turned around and sat down on a stool. He took out a cigarette from his waist and slowly lit it up. His face was full of enjoyment. Feng Zi, your acting just now was not bad. Li Shimin turned around and looked at Zhang Feng playfully. Don't talk nonsense. Zhang Feng took out the cigarette butt and rolled his eyes at Li Shimin. I wasn't acting just now. It was all for the people of the Tang dynasty in India. Li Shimin waved his hand and casually found a chair to sit on. It's not an act, okay? Then he turned to Zhang Feng and asked mysteriously, Feng Zi, do you think Xuanzang will listen to you? Zhang Feng narrowed his eyes. He didn't know what was going on. He wasn't 100% sure about this, but it was still a good thing to have Xuanzang on his side. He took a deep puff of his cigarette and said, It's hard to say. Xuanzang is a very compassionate person. He's also very loyal to his principles. It's hard to say if he'll send a message. At this point, he suddenly revealed a sinister smile. That's why I told him to arrange for guards. As long as we bring these guards into India, even if Xuanzang doesn't send any information, these guards will still be there. Do you understand? Li Shimin nodded. How could he not see through Feng Zi's little tricks? In fact, he had noticed something strange just now. It was one thing to be apprenticed to a master, but he still acted as if he appreciated him. Chapter 2039. Zhang Feng didn't have much contact with Zhang Sun Wuji, but he had some understanding of him. Since Zhang Sun Wuji had said so, he didn't say anything. He just nodded, then looked at Li Shimin and said seriously, "Lao Li, Xuanzang should be leaving soon. Arrange the guards as soon as possible. You must make it clear to the guards that gathering information is the most important thing." "You're right. I'll go back and prepare now." Li Shimin nodded. He knew the seriousness of the matter, so he didn't say anything. He stood up and called Zhang Sun Wuji, then walked out of the door. Zhang Feng didn't stop him. He sat on the stool and smoked. But at this moment, Du Ziting stumbled in. Master, someone wants to see you." "Who?" Zhang Feng looked up and glanced casually. Now that the news of his departure had spread all over Chang'an City, there were people coming to see him almost every moment, so he wasn't surprised. They said it's the Minister of Revenue and the Minister of Works. Du Ziting stood still and said, panting slightly, "The Minister of Revenue? The Minister of Works?" Zhang Feng frowned. He didn't understand why the officials of the imperial court came to see him. Did they also hear that he was leaving, so they came to see him? That shouldn't be possible. After all, these guys had important things to do every day, and he rarely interacted with the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of Works. He couldn't figure it out, so he said, "Let them in." Du Ziting took the order and left. After a while, she brought in two tall men. They were Daizhou and Duanluan. Zhang Feng also saw that these people were unfamiliar, so he couldn't sit still. He stood up and greeted them. "This one is Zhang Feng. May I know who the two sirs are?" Daizhou and Duanluan looked at each other and said in unison, "The Minister of Revenue, Daizhou, and the Minister of Works, Duanluan." "Daizhou? Duanluan?" Zhang Feng repeated in his heart. He didn't have any memory of these two, and there were very few. However, these two were still ministers of the 6 ministries of the imperial court, so he didn't dare to slight them. He smiled and said, "Sirs, please take a seat." After saying that, he glanced at Du Ziting. "Old Du, serve the two lords tea." Du Ziting accepted the order and left. Not long after, she returned with a servant carrying tea. "Sirs, please have some tea." Zhang Feng raised the teacup in front of him and gestured for the two to drink. Then he smiled and said, "May I know why the two of you are looking for me today?" Daizhou and Duanluan put down their teacups and looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Originally, the two of them were like enemies, neither willing to submit to the other. They had no choice but to come to the Zhang mansion, so they reached an agreement on the road to stop quarreling between the two of them and talk about it after the matter was settled. President Zhang, the main reason we're here today is because of the burning of Dongxi City. Duanluan couldn't keep his composure any longer and took the initiative to speak. East and West City. The Zhang mansion had a puzzled expression and glanced in the direction of Dongxi City. Dongxi City was burned a long time ago. "Why are you guys looking for me?" Indeed, Dongxi City had been burned for a few months. If this fellow didn't mention it, he probably would have forgotten about it. Duanluan smiled awkwardly. President Zhang is right. It's been a long time. It's just that the burned Dongxi City hasn't been repaired. This time His Majesty ordered us to repair it, but the Ministry of Works doesn't have enough money. In addition, we can't repair it because of the lack of workers. Therefore, we specially came to ask for your help. Are you kidding? Zhang Feng's eyes widened. He couldn't believe what this fellow said. The Ministry of Works didn't have enough money? And there were no workers? How was this possible? He subconsciously said, "Your Ministry of Works is one of the 6 ministries. How can you not even have the money to repair Dongxi City?" Duanluan looked awkwardly at Zhang Feng and said slowly, "President Zhang, I won't hide it from you. The Ministry of Works has been repairing the residences of the ministers and emperors all year round. There's a lot of money that hasn't been collected. Otherwise, why would we come looking for you?" Zhang Feng could understand what he meant. Indeed, other than building new buildings, the Ministry of Works also frequently repaired the residences of the ministers and emperors. This way they could earn some extra money. However, even if these fellows didn't have money, why did they come looking for him? Why didn't they borrow from someone else? Could there be something strange about this? He narrowed his eyes and stared seriously at Duan Luan. Minister Duan, even if your Ministry of Works doesn't have money, why did you come looking for me to borrow money? The Ministry of Revenue is the world's money house. Why don't you go to the Ministry of Revenue? After saying this, he realized the problem. Wasn't the Minister of Revenue Dai Zhou right beside him? With this thought, he turned to look at Dai Zhou. Dai Zhou also felt the burning gaze. His face turned red, and he deliberately coughed twice before slowly saying, President Zhang, it's not that our Ministry of Revenue doesn't want to borrow money. It's just that we've already spent most of our money on the Battle of Chiaotzi. We don't have any extra money. Moreover, repairing Dongxi City is not a small expense. Our Ministry of Revenue still can't afford it. The Ministry of Revenue couldn't afford it? Zhang Feng was stunned. Since the Ministry of Revenue couldn't afford it, then how big of an expense would it be? Were these two fellows trying to make him a sucker? Chapter 2040. He knew that as long as he entered the court, he wouldn't be able to get his money back. He wasn't bragging. If he lent the money to these two old men now, the court would definitely renege on the debt. This had happened before. Although he had a lot of money, he wasn't a fool. Moreover, the eastern and western markets had nothing to do with him. He still needed to use the money in Jiangnan. Thinking of this, he revealed a troubled smile. Sirs, as you know, the hundreds of people in my Zhang residence have to eat, drink, and defecate every day to make cotton-padded clothes. We don't have any spare money at all. You'd better look elsewhere. Finishing his words, he put the cigarette in his mouth and assumed a posture that said, I don't have any extra money. You can do whatever you want. In short, he didn't have any money and he didn't have any life. Dai Zhou and Duan Luan looked at each other. They had already thought of this result. After all, no one would lend money to someone for no reason. This was common sense, not to mention borrowing from the court. If it was a normal person, they might have offered the money with both hands. However, this was Zhang Feng. What could they do if he didn't want to lend? However, since they had thought of this result, they naturally had a corresponding solution. Dai Zhou smiled and revealed a harmless smile. President Zhang, do you still remember the promise you made to the students when you built White Deer College? At the mention of the college, Zhang Feng's interest was piqued. He remembered promising the students that if they didn't have a good job after they finished their studies, they could be assigned to the Ministry of Revenue or the Ministry of Works. What did this old man from the Ministry of Revenue mean by this? Did he want to use the students as an excuse? He didn't reply and quietly listened to Dai Zhou. Dai Zhou was also a clever person. Seeing Zhang Feng's interest, he struck while the iron was hot. President Zhang, you promised the students of the college that they could work in the Ministry of Revenue or the Ministry of Works after they graduate. This is an excellent opportunity. The eastern and western markets need it. You can let the students learn in advance. I also heard that there is a construction team above the college. This can be used to train the construction team. Zhang Feng raised his eyebrows. He was a little tempted. Indeed, there was a construction team above the college. However, if he had to fork out money and manpower, wouldn't this deal be too disadvantageous? He didn't get any benefits at all. Unless, students had a 100% chance of entering the Ministry of Works and the Ministry of Revenue. As he thought about it, he glanced at the two of them and smiled slightly. I understand what you mean, but you want me to pay for both the money and the people. Isn't this a bit too much of a loss? You don't do business like this, do you? He hurriedly said, What is it? Tell me quickly. The servant then reacted and hurriedly said, Master, someone is looking for you. What the hell? Zhang Feng was slightly stunned. His first reaction was that he had seen a ghost. Why were there so many people looking for him? Forget about the people outside the door. Why were there people looking for him now? Was he so popular? He frowned and asked, Who are they? The servant lowered his head and slowly said, There are dozens of them. They say they're from Mount Shao. Mount Shao. Zhang Feng frowned. When Mount Xiao was mentioned, his first reaction was those teachers. But there were only a few teachers. Why were there dozens of them? This was obviously not them. Then who could it be? Could it be the students? It shouldn't be. They should be preparing for the year-end exam. He waved his hand and said helplessly, "Let's call them in first." The servant took the order and left. After a while, he brought back dozens of strong men. Looking at the group of people, Zhang Feng vaguely remembered that they were the guards on Mount Xiao. But why did these guys come to the Zhang mansion? He asked with a puzzled look. You should be the guards on Mount Xiao, right? Why did you come to the Zhang mansion? The leader was Zhou Ji. As soon as he saw Zhang Feng, he was delighted and hurriedly said, "Director, we are the guards on Mount Xiao. This time, we came to the Zhang mansion to participate in the training in the mansion." The training in the mansion? Zhang Feng was slightly stunned. Only the people in the mansion knew about the training. How did these guys know about it? Did those guys go out to show off again? He turned his head and glanced at the guards, only to see Song Tai's face blushing. In an instant he understood something. Song Tai and the other guys went out to show off, which attracted the guards on Mount Xiao. Originally, he didn't intend to promote this training method. After all, it was only prepared for the guards going to Jiangnan. Now the guards on Mount Xiao also knew about it and came here. What about the safety on Mount Xiao? Thinking of this, he pulled a long face. If you come down like this, what about the safety on Mount Xiao? Du Ziting saw that her master was no longer angry, so she took a step forward. Master, the two officials from the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of Works have left. They said that the workers can go directly to the Ministry of Works. Oh, and they also took 50,000. Alright, don't bother me with such trivial matters. Zhang Feng waved his hand and looked indifferent. Then he suddenly remembered what had happened just now. His face changed and he said to Du Ziting, "Come with me to the study." Sending people to Jiangnan was a big deal. He felt that it was better to discuss it with Du Ziting. After all, two heads were better than one. Du Ziting was confused. The master was angry just now, but now he seemed to be a different person. But he didn't dare to ask more, because he knew that the master had been unhappy every day since the news from Jiangnan. He could only follow the master's footsteps to the study. The two soon arrived at the study. Zhang Feng sat on the main seat, then pointed to the chair next to him, and motioned for Du Ziting to sit down. "Old Du, I'm going to send people to Jiangnan first. What do you think?" Zhang Feng looked at Du Ziting with a serious expression and asked. Of course. Du Ziting nodded. He had always supported the master's decision. Just as he finished speaking, he thought of something and added, "But who are you going to send?" Zhang Feng took out a cigarette from his waist and lit it before saying, "I'm going to send Gao Qian over, but this guy is a simpleton. One person isn't enough. Help me think of a few more. At least give me 5. Gao Qian's strength was not a problem, and his identity was not a problem. But this guy's brain was not good. It would be bad if he fell into someone's trap. So he had to find a few good brains." Du Ziting stroked his half-white beard and narrowed his eyes. After thinking for a long time, he slowly said, "Master, don't you have students? You can send your students." "You thought for a long time and this is all you can think of?" Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Du Ziting and said unhappily. He had expected this guy to come up with some ideas. But this guy's words were equivalent to not saying anything. Students? What's the use of students? Those bastards from the academy went to Jiangnan, but they were not enough to feed those old dogs. And Ma Zhou if this guy went. This time, I called you here because I want you to go to Jiangnan. Jiangnan? Hao Chujun and Lai Ji looked at each other, a little confused. They had thought of countless possibilities just now, but they never thought that their teacher would ask them to go to Jiangnan. Right now Jiangnan is in a period of strife. Rumor has it that prices are soaring. Why go to Jiangnan? Could it be that they were going to stabilize prices? Hao Chujun made an obeisance and asked with a puzzled face. Teacher, why do you want us to go to Jiangnan? Zhang Feng threw away the cigarette but in his hand and said with a serious face, this time, I want you to go to Jiangnan mainly for two purposes. The first is to protect your. The second is to develop power. You know that I will go to Jiangnan after the end of the year, but now the situation in Jiangnan is unclear, and I don't know about your situation. As long as you go, I will be relieved. Hao Chujun nodded slightly. He could understand his teacher's thoughts. Yor would definitely be his woman in the future. It was not a problem to protect her now, and it was understandable to develop power in Jiangnan. After all, Jiangnan was a rich town. Doing business there would always be better than doing business in Chang, and so he did not have any thoughts in his heart. Lai Ji and Hao Chujun were similar. At first, they were just a little surprised, but later, they did not have any doubts. It was not a bad thing that the dean wanted to develop power in Jiangnan. He nodded slightly. Dean, I have no problem. Teacher, I have no problem either. Hao Chujun nodded. As Zhang Feng's disciple, he naturally had to support him in the first place. Hearing their words, Zhang Feng was relieved. However, he thought of something and said with a cautious face, this time, not only the two of you will go to Jiangnan, but also Gao Can and the two brothers of the Yu family. I don't need to tell you about their temperaments, so I hope that you can restrain these three guys and not let them cause trouble. It will be difficult to clean up when the time comes. Hearing this, Hao Chujun and Lai Ji's heart sank. They knew that these three guys were difficult to deal with, especially Gao Kansas. He usually looked silly, but his martial arts were very powerful. If they did something that made him unhappy, they might be unlucky. The two brothers of the Yu family were also straightforward. They were used to abusing others in Chang, and then liked to bully others. If these three guys got together, wouldn't they poke a hole in the sky? Chapter 2044. Indeed, the Yuchi brothers were considered tyrants in Chang, and, coupled with the power of the Yuchi family, these two guys were fearless. Especially with Cheng Chimo, these three people were simply a combination that no one dared to provoke in Chang'an City. As for Gao Ken, this guy was also fearless. Coupled with his military achievements, he was a character that no one dared to provoke in Chang'an. Asking him to go to Jiangnan with these three guys? Thinking of this, Lai Ji's heart trembled a little. Go to Jiangnan with these three guys? If he made these guys unhappy on the way, wouldn't he be beaten up? Hiss. He sucked in a breath of cold air, and turned to look at Zhang Feng. Director, you want us to go with these three guys? Hao Chujun also felt a little uncomfortable, but he didn't dare to ask. He could only look at Zhang Feng with sparkling eyes. Zhang Feng actually guessed the thoughts of these two guys. After all, the two of them were scholars, and the three guys were warriors. There would inevitably be some disputes if they were together, but this was also something that couldn't be helped. Without these two guys, no one could control Gao Can and the others. It was precisely for this reason that he wanted to send Hao Chujun and Lai Ji to control Gao Can and the others. Therefore, he would not change his mind. Therefore, he put on a sincere look. Chujun, Lai Ji, this is also something that can't be helped. Except for the two of you, there is no one who can control Gao Can and the others. What's more, if I let others go, I won't feel at ease. That's why I asked you to go. Hao Chujun originally had some objections, but after hearing this, he seemed to be able to understand his teacher's feelings. Not to mention, this was what his teacher had instructed him to do. Now that his teacher was speaking so earnestly, how could he not agree? He turned to look at Zhang Feng and said with a face of understanding, Mentor, I understand what you said. I am willing to be the forerunner. Zhang Feng nodded with satisfaction. He had expected that this guy might think about it, but he didn't expect this guy to agree so quickly. This was still very surprising. Good, I really didn't misjudge you. He looked at Hao Chujun with admiration, then turned to Li Ji and smiled. What about you? Lai Ji looked embarrassed. He wanted to think about it. After all, going to Jiangnan was not a small matter. But now that Hao Chujun had agreed, what else could he do? He could only nod his head in agreement. Zhang Feng nodded his head in satisfaction. He was just about to talk about the situation in Jiangnan when a roar came from outside. Fengzi! Fengzi! There was no need to guess who this voice belonged to. Other than Yu Qigong, who else could it be? Sure enough, not long after, Yu Qigong led the two Yuqi brothers and Gao Kin in. Seeing this, Zhang Feng hurriedly went up to greet them. Old Gao, you're finally here. Yu Qigong grinned and said, Fengzi, why did you call us here? Why do you insist on bringing these two brothers along? As he spoke, Yu Qigong patted Yu Qibao and Yu Qibao's shoulders. The latter looked at Zhang Feng in confusion. Yes, Fengzi, why did you suddenly call us here? Gao Kin also looked at Zhang Feng with a silly expression and asked in confusion. Take a seat, take a seat. Zhang Feng pointed to the chairs next to him. After everyone sat down, he said with a serious expression, Old Gao, I called you here because of something in Jiangnan. I hope old Gao can bring the two brothers to Jiangnan. Jiangnan? Gao Kin looked at Yu Qigong, confused. Jiangnan was now in a period of chaos. All the major clans were fighting for their own interests. Why did he want him to go to Jiangnan now? He turned to Zhang Feng and asked in confusion, Fengzi, why do you want me to go to Jiangnan? Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and said seriously, As you know, I'm preparing to expand my influence in Jiangnan. I wanted to go there as soon as possible, but there are still many things I can't get away from. I can only go there at the end of the year, so I hope you can go there first to help me stabilize the situation. Gao Kin curled his lips. He was a little against going to Jiangnan because most of the people there were scholars, and he was a martial artist. If he went there, he would feel like fire and water. Moreover, scholars had always looked down on martial artists. Although the gap between scholars and martial artists had lessened, it still hadn't been completely removed. So he was a little dissatisfied to be asked to go to Jiangnan now. Yu Qigong was different. He knew that Fengzi wanted the two brothers to go to Jiangnan not only to expand his influence, but also to protect Yu was a woman of the Yuqi family. Now that the situation in Jiangnan was not good, as a member of the main family, he couldn't just stand by and watch. So he didn't hesitate and nodded. Fengzi, I agree to let the two brothers go to Jiangnan. Chapter 2045. Yu Qibaolin and Yu Qibaolin were still in a daze. When they heard their father agree on their behalf, their hearts sank. However, there was nothing they could do about it. They knew that once their father had said something, it was impossible to take it back. They could only accept it silently. Gao Kin saw that everyone had agreed, so he couldn't say anything more. He just said lightly, Fengzi, since everyone has agreed, then I have no objections. However, the people in Jiangnan are all scholars. If you let the three of us who are illiterate go there, what if we get into a fight? At that time I won't care. Zhang Feng seemed to have expected him to say this. He pointed at Hao Chujun and the others and smiled. You don't have to worry. Not only are the three of you going, but they are going as well. Gao Kin followed Zhang Feng's gaze and glanced at Hao Chujun and Baolin. He said with a bit of disdain, What can they do? Zhang Feng smiled. Don't underestimate them. They are all scholars. When they go with you to Jiangnan, they will take care of many things. You three just need to put in effort. Hearing this, Gao Kin immediately felt much better. He was annoyed with mental work. As long as they put in effort, how could it not be easy? The Yuqi brothers were the same. They had perfectly inherited their father's genes, and adhered to this principle. If they could act, they would not use their brains. Seeing that Hao Chujun and Baolin were on Jiangnan Road, they felt much more at ease. Zhang Feng looked at Hao Chujun and the others and said seriously, After you go to Jiangnan, the most important thing is to first understand the situation in Jiangnan, especially those top clans. For example, the industries they are involved in, family businesses, assets, and so on. Also, the products that are popular in the Jiangnan market, no matter what it is, must be investigated clearly. Then send a letter to me. Hao Chujun nodded. He understood that the dean was going to start with the Jiangnan clans. The best way to attack the clans was to first destroy their industries. Yes, Dean. Lai Ji nodded slightly. These things were not a problem for him. Before his family had met with disaster, They were considered a large aristocratic family. He still had some confidence in dealing with the clans. Zhang Feng was very satisfied with their answers. He smiled and said, "Thank you for your hard work this time." After that, he turned to look at Gao Can and the others. "Do you have any other questions? If not, get ready to go. Leaving today." Gao Can frowned. "That's right. Let's leave today." Zhang Feng nodded and asked, "Do you have any questions?" Gao Can shook his head. He had always been a little against Jiangnan, but now that everything had happened, he had nothing to say. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone. "Since no one has any objections, then let's get ready to depart. I have already prepared everything for you." He still had the right to speak about the clan, so he nodded. "Dean, I understand what you're saying, but I'm worried that Gao Can and the others will provoke the clan." Zhang Feng pursed his lips. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Don't worry about this. Gao Can likes to drink. When you leave later, bring 2 bottles of good wine with you. If he acts on his own, you can use good wine to lure him. I guarantee that he will obediently obey. As for the 2 brothers of the Yu family, they are just 2 children. You can just coax them a little." Hao Chujun and Lai Ji nodded. Originally, they were worried that it would not be easy to control these 3 fellows after going to Jiangnan. Now that they knew their weakness, it would be easier to make a move. "You guys sit here for a while. When those 3 fellows come, we will set off." Zhang Feng stood up and glanced at the 2 of them. Then he walked to the front yard. These few days, checking on the training of the guards at home had become something he had to do every day. Although these guards used to be soldiers, they had been retired for many years. It was inevitable that they would be stained with some lazy habits. Therefore, he still had to urge them more to prevent them from being useless when they went to Jiangnan in the future. Before he reached the front yard, he heard a shout. It was the sound of the guards doing push-ups. Zhang Feng was delighted. He secretly thought that these fellows did not waste his efforts. He quickened his pace and walked to the front yard. He saw the guards lying in several rows, doing push-ups on the ground with their upper bodies naked. Their faces were red, and beads of sweat rolled down from their foreheads. He did not disturb the guards. He turned and walked to the hall. However, at this moment, old Du's voice came from behind him. "Master, the 2 brothers of the Yu family are waiting outside. They said that they want you to take them out. They are about to set off." Zhang Feng was delighted. He did not expect this guy to come so quickly. He turned to the hall and shouted, "Chujun Lai Ji, get ready to set off. Come to the door." After that, he turned and walked to the door. "Master, the 2 young masters of the Yu family pulled a carriage. Do you know what is inside?" Du Ziting followed behind Zhang Feng and chattered endlessly. When the Yuqi brothers left, Zhang Feng guessed that they might have gone home to get something. Therefore, he was not surprised to see a carriage. He only said lightly, "It's okay. Let's go take a look." When he was discussing with Xuanzang about India, he had promised to pick Xuanzang up at the port. Now it was time to prepare the steam engine. Thinking about it, he turned around and glanced at Du Ziting. "Old Du, get ready. I'm going to Shao Mountain." Du Ziting took the order and left. After a while, the servant drove the carriage to the main gate. Zhang Feng boarded the carriage. With a crack of the whip, the carriage rushed towards Shao Mountain. He didn't say anything along the way, and soon arrived at Shao Mountain. However, this time he didn't choose to go to the academy. Instead, he went to the textile factory because he intended to give this task to Cheng Chimo and the others. When he just arrived at the textile factory, Zhang Feng didn't see Cheng Chimo. However, Cheng Chimo and the others saw Zhang Feng and strode towards him. "Fengzi, you're finally here. I thought you had forgotten about us." Cheng Chimo hugged Zhang Feng as if he was crying and reminiscing. "That's enough." Zhang Feng pushed Cheng Chimo away and said with a look of disgust, "Don't you know what you smell like? Don't hug me." Chimo scratched his head awkwardly. He originally wanted to leave a good impression on Fengzi. After all, the composite bow was so good that he wanted to make something else. However, when he saw Fengzi's look of disgust, he didn't know what to say. Fortunately, Zhang Suncheng was quick-witted. He hurriedly stepped forward and said with a smile, "Fengzi, the composite bow you made last time was really amazing. You can shoot a willow leaf from 100 steps away. When are you going to make something else?" Dugo nodded and said, "Yes, Fengzi. When are you going to make something new? You see, we have nothing to do in the textile factory." "Nothing to do?" Zhang Feng raised his eyebrows in joy. He was still thinking about how to explain it to these guys. Now that the opportunity had come, he deliberately coughed twice and said with a mysterious expression, "This time, I came to find you guys to prepare something new." "What new thing? Tell us." Chimo rubbed his hands, impatience written all over his face. "What's the hurry?" Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Chimo and then glanced at the others. He said, "The new thing I'm going to make this time is called a steam engine. It needs water to operate. Take me to a water source first." Chapter 2049. At first, he didn't believe that the steam could cook an egg, but after being scalded by the steam, his heart started to waver. It hurt so much when he put his hand on it. If it were an egg, it might really be cooked. Zhang Feng grabbed Chimo's hand and looked at it. He smiled and said, "Iron Bull, I told you just now that the steam is very powerful, but you didn't believe me. Now you're in trouble, aren't you? But this is good. You've really experienced the power of the steam. Now, go find some leaves to wrap your hand and put the egg back on. Let's see how long it will take to cook." Chimo was speechless. He wanted to let it go, but when he heard Fengzi's words, his curiosity was aroused. He turned around and grabbed some leaves to wrap his hand. Then he put the egg on the steam. This time, with Zhang Feng's guidance, the steam didn't burn Chimo's hand. However, the temperature of the steam was still as high as before. He felt a little uncomfortable, so he turned to look at Zhang Feng. "Fengzi, how long will this take? My hand hurts a lot." Zhang Feng glanced at the steam and said indifferently, "If you feel pain in your hand, just let go." "I'll let go?" Chimo opened his eyes wide and looked at Zhang Feng with some confusion. "If I let go, will the egg fall?" Zhang Feng squinted his eyes and looked at the steam. He thought for a while and said, "It shouldn't. The steam has a very strong impact. Let go and try." Chimo was a little unwilling because he wanted to see if the egg could cook. He was worried that it would break if he let go. However, the steam was too strong. The leaves in his hand were all wet and his hand hurt. After thinking for a while, he let go. But something magical happened. Not only did the egg not fall, but it was also hit in the air by the steam. Chimo opened his eyes wide and slowly turned to look at Zhang Feng. "Fengzi, what's going on?" Zhang Suncheng and Zhang Suncheng also looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled look. They had seen the whole process, but they didn't know what happened. Even though they knew that the steam was somewhat powerful, they didn't expect it to be so powerful. Zhang Feng smiled and said proudly, "Steam is very powerful. This is just the tip of the iceberg. If you increase the water capacity and the holes on the lid are bigger, it won't be a problem to make a cow float, let alone an egg. Also, steam can be heated and humidified. It can also generate power. As a machine driver, the experiment I did this time is to use steam as a machine driver. Think about it, if this little bit of steam can move an egg, what if there is more steam? Can't you move something 10 times bigger than an egg?" The three of them were a little confused because they were still at the stage where the egg floated. Now that Zhang Feng said a lot, they were even more confused.